call the May 7th meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. As a first item on our agenda, we're going to have committee business. Before we get started, Ms. Moody, do you have anything?
Just little things. We have a visitor badge hanging there on the heater, whatever it is there. So that there's restrooms right outside the door for the committee members if you want to go out there. And then we did give you minutes from the last time. You should all have those paper copies. I think that's it to start.
Very good. I think that's actually where we're going to start. Everybody should have received electronically and received a paper copy of the minutes from Thursday, May 17th, 2018. Commissioner Bosevich.
I'll move approval of the Thursday, May 17th, 2018 minutes.
Very good. Is there a second? Second for Mr. Abel. Any discussion about the minutes?
I'll
Sugar.
abstain from voting because I wasn't there.
Okay, very good.
Oh, I wasn't
Okay.
Well, if we have 8 people here and 2 abstain, then we're still good to pass it, right?
Right, but we're talking about there's been 3 people discussed so far who didn't want to vote.
Oh, 3, so at this point, can we approve the minutes?
So a quorum is, or for approval of these, we need 6, is that correct?
So what
It's a majority of.
Well, you could ask
A majority of members
you could
present.
ask whether or not the minutes are accurate upon that, then.
Right. He abstains too.
Okay, we're still reviewing and discussing the minutes. We have a motion to approve and a second. If there's no further discussion, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as published, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Very good. Motion passes. So do I need to ask for abstentions? Abstentions, please. 1, 2, that's it. Thank you. Okay. One quick question for the Budget Committee members. Does anybody have any questions about items that are on the agenda before we get started? Commissioner Sorensen.
I'll just mention to the sheriff and district attorney that if I run out of the door, it's because I've got to do some things connected with my job as board chair, and I am putting the TV on to watch it.
Very good. Okay, let's move on to our next item on the agenda, our district attorney, Ms. Provost.
Hello, I'm Patty Perlow, Lane County DA. I'm going to try to get really quickly through this so that we can get to your questions, because I think what you want to know is probably more important than what I'm going to tell you. If I just click the right arrow, or what is going to make this go?
Try it.
There we go. The DA's office is comprised of 4 divisions. The one that most people are familiar with is criminal prosecution. That is all of the felony cases committed within Lane County, referred to us by the 11 law enforcement agencies in Lane County. We also take misdemeanor referrals from the Lane County Sheriff, Oregon State Police, OLCC, and the Railroad. We we handle the domestic violence prosecutions for all of the agencies in Lane County, and some of the other more complicated cases that get referred over. The Death Investigations Division is newly named because of a statutory change. We aren't allowed to call it medical examiner anymore. So that is comprised of 3 full-time employees and a host of extra help who are responsive 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to thank you. Assist in the investigations of unattended or unexplained deaths. The Family Law Division is the division that enforces child support orders and medical care orders by the court. And the Victim Services Division is the division of the office that enforces the constitutional rights of all crime victims identified in the county for cases referred to our office. We are entirely general fund funded. We have other revenue sources, but out of county budgets and accounts, it is strictly general fund. Our other resources include a number of grants. The Child Support Enforcement Division, the Family Law Division, gets 2/3 of their cost repaid by a federal grant. They also receive some incentives that pass through the State Department of Justice. We have state revenues including grants through the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, the Violence Against Women Act, Victims of Crime Act, the federal pass-through grants, the state. We just were at Joe's request. We all learned what CAFA is. It's the criminal fine account. That name has changed over and over again over the years. We have a grant through the Oregon Department of Transportation that funds our new DUII investigator. We get revenue for providing discovery in criminal cases. We also provide the sentencing guidelines grid and have, since the sentencing guidelines went into effect in 1989, have the copyright for the grid that all of the prosecutor offices around the state use. We didn't produce the grid for a couple of years because there was a lawsuit pending regarding House Bill 3078 on repeat property offenders. Lake County didn't participate in that. And it finally resolved, and so we have had, I don't know, about $13,000 worth of requests since the grid was produced this year. We have one-time intra-fund transfer for grand jury recordation expenses. We have not received any money yet, and we haven't received our equipment yet, but on July 1, we will be mandated to record all grand jury proceedings, to produce the transcripts, to seek the protective orders, and to cover all of that, even though grand jury is a function of the court. The legislature has not determined what portion of that grand jury recordation they're going to fund or what portion the counties are going to be responsible for. All right. Here is the exciting news. Since the budget was produced, the proposed budget was produced, I was contacted by Commissioner Bozovich and the chair of the Public Safety Coordinating Council, Paul Solomon, to say that they were likely to be deferring revenue that had been coming to my office to support a community prosecution project and our Senate Bill 416 prison diversion program from my office. So that's about a $324,800 reduction, according to Christine Moody. They didn't have the specific numbers when I met with them. That committee isn't meeting for final determination until May 20th, and the budget will already be done from your hands at that point. But if that happens, we'll have to be going to the board to request additional general fund funding, or else be facing layoffs in my office. All right. As you can see, personnel is the bulk of my budget. We, it's like 90% of it is personnel, and a little over 10% of it is other costs. We've had some expensive cases coming through in the last year. We have had to bring experts in from out of state. There was a shutdown on testing of blood from the state of Washington lab. The Oregon State Police don't test blood, so we were shipping it on a grant to Washington, and then that grant ran out, so we were having to contract with other labs, which created an increase in expense for us. We have had a case out of, you probably heard about the backlog on rape kits, sexual assault kits, and we prosecuted a case that came out of that, but unfortunately all of those kits were sent to Utah. So we had to bring an expert witness from Utah at a cost of $2,200 a day plus travel. The company that was transporting the deceased in Lane County to the morgue and to the mortuaries shut down this past year, this year actually, due to an untenable financial model. What was happening is that the mortuaries in town, despite the fact that their advertised prices include transportation, weren't paying the cost back to the transport company, and so they went out of business. And so now my budget is covering the transport bodies from scenes to the morgue, and then also we pay for any indigent, which you can imagine that the number of indigent decedents in Lane County is on the rise. You can read what other expenses we have. The rest of them are general. I mean, we would have them anyway, but costs are going up in all of these areas. We are very fortunate in Lane County to have great partnerships for public safety outcomes. Criminal justice system alone doesn't make for public safety. It is a system and a collaborative system. These partnerships reflect some of the grant funding that we've received, but also the great outcomes that we are achieving through the 416 program is diverting our medium to high risk property offenders from state prison. We have a grant that covers a fourth of a lawyer for a response team for sexual assaults on the U of O campus or involving U of O students. We are involved in the treatment courts. We have 3 really vibrant, successful treatment courts in Lane County. I wish we had a 4th. I've been working for that, but to date, that's not been on the priority list for the courts, not because it's not a priority for some of us in the systems. The crash investigator that's grant funded by the Oregon Department of Transportation is available to assist with investigations for all of our law enforcement agencies in the county. We participate on different multidisciplinary teams, and we work with Women's Space, SAS, and Legal Aid to provide services to victims. So we are not an isolated bubble department within Lane County. We would not have the success we do here or the outcomes we have without the partnerships that we are engaged in. The criminal division is made up of a major crimes team, 2 general felony teams that have assumed responsibility for the misdemeanor lawyers as well, and a domestic violence team. And the trial team leaders from the criminal division, other than the major crimes team, are all here. If you have any questions about what they do specifically. And we have 1 attorney assigned to juvenile. We do not do juvenile dependency work any longer. That ended about 7 years ago now, hard to believe. Just assigned to do delinquency work, which is if a juvenile commits an act that would be a crime if an adult did it. We have 1 attorney assigned to all 3 of our treatment courts. And that is a full-time position. We have 3 investigators and 6 attorneys on call all the time to assist law enforcement. We have a police legal advisor pager, a major crimes pager, homicide pager, which, by the way, we had 4 homicides this past weekend. They're on call and available all the time. We cover civil commitment hearings, which are the people who are in need of, they're either a danger to themselves or others, or unable to care for themselves. And so we are an assistance to the court in appearing on those, and that actually, it has increased dramatically over the years. We cover public records appeals. Even though we are not quasi-judicial, that is a quasi-judicial function. We have to determine if the agencies, the public agencies around Lane County have not disclosed records when they should have. We cover set-asides, motions regarding sex offender registration, and license reinstatements. I actually contract with a retired lawyer to cover a lot of those extra assignments because we just don't have the time to do all of that. And as I mentioned before, on July 1, we will begin recording grand jury proceedings. So, criminal division is 49 FTE, and Becca has how the number was arrived at $7,583,672. Death Investigations Division is to determine or help the medical examiner determine cause and manner of death. They identify people if it's an unknown. They look at bones. They deal with what happens with the body once we aren't. If the medical examiner doesn't need to actually physically put hands on a decedent, they do a triage with the on-call mortuaries around town to move the bodies and keep them going. Family Law Division was about 20, Matt Nagy's the head of the lead attorney for the Family Law Division, about $21 million in collections of child support for Lane County kids. This last year, the state bought a new software system, which has been an actual nightmare. It's literally a nightmare. That's sending mass letters out to people who are not supposed to be receiving these letters. It's this last week, personal information about people went to the wrong people, and it includes my name as a partner of the Department of Justice in that. The staff has been working overtime. I repurposed, that's not a very nice word. I borrowed a legal secretary from the criminal division, and so we are working one down in criminal so that she can assist over at the family law division with processing the work. We received, 600 new cases with the transfer of the software that have to be opened and figure out what happened on those cases previously. It's been a workload nightmare, but they all have a great attitude. Nobody's said
We're all still there. We're still working.
And we've posted for a temp help to come in and help assist with some of this so that the legal secretary can come back to the criminal division. All right, and there's a vacant assistant district attorney position over there because the lead attorney retired earlier this year. That position, we've actually made an offer, but it's a judicial clerk who's not getting released until August. Victim Services Division, as I mentioned, is responsible for enforcing the constitutional rights of all victims. They make contact initially with the victims in each case. They send out all of the paperwork. They do the certifications with the court that we're in compliance. They handle the restraining order requests that come in, the stalking order requests. There's a new gun emergency protective order that they are assisting. It's actually an assistance to the court. It's not really a DA function, but it helps move things along much more efficiently for the court that we participate in all of the Family Abuse Prevention Act restraining orders and stalking orders and all. These are our highlights. That doesn't even begin to cover everything that happened this year. Take a quick look. All right, so our challenges include the likely loss of the JRI money. The good news is our victim services is getting money that is really unexpected from the VOCA grant. And so we are able to provide assistance to victims in levels that we haven't before in the past. If somebody needs, I just recently signed an agreement to get somebody into an apartment who was rendered homeless because of their being involved in a domestic violence incident. As I mentioned, we don't know yet specifically what's going to be compensated under grand jury recordation, and the equipment's supposed to get dropped on our doorstep at some point, but has not yet. Oh, is it tomorrow? All right, well, that's exciting. They won't support it, they won't do anything with the program, but there was a funding ask at the legislature. Doesn't cover lawyer time reviewing, doesn't cover most of the actual expenses, but it would cover if we had to hire additional staff or the cost of the transcripts. This is how my department fits in within the strategic plan to provide for safe and healthy county, our vibrant communities, our robust infrastructure, our people and partnerships. And now, this is the part that you probably care most about.
We'll start in this direction here, Mr. Stoneford.
I remember shortly after you became district attorney, I think you made some changes and our no files took a substantial decrease. What impact will that JRI funding have on no files?
So if out of 20, there are 29 lawyers total in the DA's office. 1 is assigned to juvenile, 4 are in the family law division, so 24 lawyers are handling all of the criminal cases, adult criminal cases that come in. If 3 positions are lost, we will be going back to not filing criminal cases for lack of resources.
And right now we file everything, right?
Right, well,
Well-
no, we don't file everything because not everything has evidence to support it.
Everything you want to file, we file.
Everything that the evidence supports is filed. So, yes. Thanks for that softball lob.
Can I ask just a clarifying to that? Is that okay? Are they all 3 positions, attorney positions that are being?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just didn't know.
Well, it's 3.2. There is some support staff in that, but
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this presentation, and, I've been on this budget committee quite a long time, and I really appreciate your leadership of the DA's office in many ways. The one area I'm most interested in is hearing your response to concerns about the data from the DA's office, or maybe lack of data, and the utility of keeping data on outcomes so that we can see whether or not the DA's office is meeting the objectives that you and leadership in the DA's office set for the DA's office. It sounds a lot more reactive, like there's a murder, someone's got to prosecute that murder. There's a criminal case that comes in from one of those 13, 12, 11, 13.
it's actually 11 agencies plus OLCC and the railroad.
Yeah, so those agencies, they decide whether or not they're gonna bring something to you, and then you process it and determine whether or not it's gonna get filed and whether or not it's gonna get pursued. So I'm wondering how to be direct about it. How would we, if we did establish, I mean we meaning together, established some outcomes, how would we do that? And are there other DA's offices that have that kind of outcome-oriented approach?
Well, I don't think just looking at the DA's office gives you any information because we are part of the public safety system. And so what we can tell you is this is how many cases came in, these are the kind of cases that came in, and this is just talking about the criminal division, and these are the outcomes of those particular cases.
And in the family law, this is how many families were served, or victims, how many victims were served.
Correct. But if you want to look at what the impact is on public safety as a whole, you have to look at the systems. And the Criminal Justice Commission has a website that provides terrific information and dashboards on how our systems are working. I know if you're referring to the information provided by Rose Wilde, I don't want to, it's founded on a lot of misconceptions. Number one is that Oregon does not have a huge mass incarceration. And I encourage you to go to the Criminal Justice Commission website to see that out of a population of nearly 4 million people, we have about 15,000 people incarcerated currently.
These are state level numbers.
State level numbers. And that projection was going skyward, and we were going to be building new prisons, and despite the fact the population continues to grow, our prison usage is actually dropping. And you can see that the prospect is that we won't be opening any new prisons in the foreseeable future, at least during my, well, long past my employment years. So we are addressing those things through programs like the 416 program, and
So the outcomes could be addressed in an overall look at the criminal justice system in Lane County, but to name one agency within the criminal justice system, it'd be hard for you to determine,
yeah.
to set those outcomes.
It really, because we're all responsible working together.
Yeah.
And so you can look at our recidivism rates. The state recidivism rates are right around 50%.
But what does your prosecution decision on any one case have to do with recidivism?
Absolutely nothing, except that if the person accepts an offer to go to treatment court and successfully completes it, which, that percentage isn't super high, but if that person gets to graduation, the odds of them coming back to court again or coming through the criminal justice system is really low.
How amenable are you to an outcome approach to public safety, the overall system to public safety? Like we should have fewer crimes, or?
Well, right, we can't control the crime level with the level of law enforcement we have. If you want crime to go down in your community, you have a law enforcement presence so that people are deterred from committing the crimes that they do. You have a mental health system in place that's adequate. We don't have that. We don't. And so we are working really well with what we have, but if you want to actually have a measurable reduction in crime in our area, there are a whole bunch of systems that need to be better
And we want
resourced.
crime down, happiness up, we want prosperity up. So some of these things are beyond the scope of the DA's office.
All of them are beyond the scope of the DA's office. Although I do participate in all of the meetings in the community to try to come up with solutions with the resources that we have to come up with some better outcomes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bosevich.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify a little bit on the JRI side of things. I sit as the chair of our local Public Safety Coordinating Council's Budget Committee. And as we were looking at our budgets for this year and what we're expecting to get in community corrections funding and Justice Reinvestment Act funding, we were looking at on at least the governor's proposed budget side and what the co-chairs recommended, possibly having to make cuts in our programs because there's not enough there to even continue current level of service. Part of that, the one place we saw where we most likely will have to make a cut is in the community mediation portion because it's been heavily underutilized, and it would be difficult for us to justify an audit of the JRI funds continuing to fund that one ADA and the staff that's connected to that. The 416 program isn't necessarily what will be cut, but there's an issue there that we were going through a randomized control test with that. So we had half the folks not getting the full benefits of the 416 program. That trial has ended. So now we have people that we have to actually provide the rest of the service for. We can't put them in the control side. so there's more jail beds we need, and other treatment, and that adds to the cost of that program. Suddenly that program is like a balloon payment coming in. So that's why that one's kind of identified as a possibility of cuts. It's not where we want to go. And this gets into the balance, and we're going to be talking to the sheriff coming up next. The sheriff utilizes a lot of those funds also for sanction beds, work crews, et cetera. Like DA said, we haven't finalized that conversation. Plus, we're waiting, I feel like I'm back on a school board. I'm waiting for the legislature to do something, but I've got to guess what they're going to do and draft a balanced budget based on that guess. And we're trying to do that with the Public Safety Coordinating Council budget on those two funding sources. And, we hope that they're getting some of the message about, funding the full-time study on community corrections, funding at least current level of service and justice reinvestment. If that's the case, we'll be able to pick up the 416 program. I still think the community mediation program is going to probably be cut out of the JRI because it just can't qualify for the funding, in those programs. That's the issue. It's just the underutilization makes it hard to justify in an audit.
Well, and I would love to not receive any grant funding for lawyers in my office and be adequately resourced out of the general fund, because I don't think it's a sustainable model to use grant money that is, every couple of years you're having to reapply for and determine how you're going to use it. And so I would be ecstatic if there was another funding source for those lawyers. We applied for that grant initially during the time after I lost it. Well, Alex was DA at the time. We lost a third of our staff because of the budget problems in the county. And that's when all of the systems started actually working together instead of being siloed. So it's been a great thing for our community. And if I can keep whole and get off of grant money, I will be super happy, and we'll have no complaints for you.
Thank you. Mr. Norris?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Perla, for coming and presenting this. This is obviously very important work, and I personally work with the treatment court programs, and so it's a personal place in my heart to hear some of the DH budgets. And sorry, brain turned to oatmeal there. I have several questions here, so I hope you bear with me. I want to echo Commissioner Sorensen's concern for transparency. I was also approached by several community members that had also expressed some concerns about transparency. One of them commenting on the department goals and strategic planning that the district attorney's office is the only one that doesn't have any measurable goals or any specific ideas. The other concern that I had was going through the budget, the line items there. My question to you is there any staff focus on data analytics, data measurements, any data gathering at all?
So for the first part of that, we are strictly reactive. So what comes in the door to us is what we deal with. So I can't tell you we are going to serve this many people or prosecute this many crimes in advance. I don't have any control over what's coming in the door. I can tell you that we will prosecute, as long as we're staffed, every case that there is sufficient evidence to prove it, and that we will support the victims of those crimes completely to enforce their constitutional rights. But I can't set measurable goals ahead of time on a division that is completely responsive and doesn't initiate any. We don't go out and investigate crime. It's like the beginning of Law and Order. The police investigate the crimes and the district attorneys prosecute the offenders. The second part of yours, do we have any people who gather data? Well, we have a database for the criminal division that we can pull out specific numbers under the parameters that are provided to us by our software provider.
Is
So,
that process, is that public, or is that within the DA's office only?
well, it's not public. There are a number of reasons why. Number one, it's proprietary. The data is, the system is proprietary. There is CJIS, Criminal Justice Information System, information in the system that we are forbidden from allowing the public to access. And so if you come to our office, you can't free rein walk around in there, or we would lose all of our access to the criminal justice data. And so if you ask me to provide you data, I will provide you what I can within the parameters of what's available. And I will task somebody in my office who has another job. I guess as the budget committee, if you want to provide another position to have data management, we would be able to do that. But for that to happen, on top of all of the other responsibilities that aren't funded, honestly, that the legislature gives us, we move somebody from doing something else they're assigned to do to get the information. And so if you tell me what it is you'd like to know, I polled, or Angela actually polled a lot of data because I wanted to be able to answer questions that you had.
Yes, actually, for specifics, so in 2016 and through the search document that we received, there was from Multnomah County, they did data analytics of conclusions, recidivism, based on race, ethnic, sexual orientation, gender, and so that would be something I'm curious about, conclusions through the DA's office, whether a plea was offered, a plea was accepted, whether it was prosecuted through the full way. I'm curious what those conclusions are and the percentages of those, and in addition to those, the percentages of the race, the ethnicity, the gender, the sexual orientation, if that data is gathered, of those people and of those conclusions.
So, Multnomah County has a DNA expert and a public information officer on top of having a staff of hundreds. So no, I don't have someone who can gather that specifically or keep it for you. I can refer you to the Criminal Justice Commission, who does keep a lot of that data. And recidivism is something that is specifically measured by the Criminal Justice Commission, and Lane County is actually far better than the rest of the state on that, although it's not good. And plea versus...
an offered plea deal, accepted plea deal, or prosecuted all the way through. So if no plea deal is offered and the DA continues on with prosecuting, I'm not making sense, but
I can't
thank you.
find, I have no data source for was no offer ever made. I can tell you that every criminal case gets set for a status conference 35 days, approximately 35 days from arraignment, where there is a mandated settlement conference. And only about 10% of our cases go to trial, the rest of them resolve. So 90% of our cases have some kind of plea offer.
And thank you, Chair, for your patience. Last question, softball question. You mentioned that we have 3 treatment courts that are currently going right
Yes.
now. And you mentioned the 4th. What would be the 4th?
DUI.
DUI.
I think that a DUI court would be, would really help with the outcomes of people who have alcohol use disorder and are, or, well, using any substances actually, and operating motor vehicles. We have a really high traffic fatality rate in Lane County, and because we don't have a great law enforcement presence, we are, again, being reactive as opposed to proactive. And if we could get people engaged in a system the same way we do with our other treatment courts, I think our outcomes would be better.
Thank you, Ms. Bell.
Mr. Abel?
Thanks. Ms. Perlow, a couple quick questions. Under the family law, it says maximize available funding through performance-based federal incentives. Do you know exactly, approximately how much that brought in?
Roughly around 112,000 a year, it varies.
112,000 a year. A lot of it, the incentive money is put in a pot of money and then distributed. So we can't predict year by year what we're going to get, but our outcomes are far better than most of the contemporaries because we have devoted the resources we have to the child support and family program.
Thank you. And then it says the Family Law Division handled cases from Jackson and Yamhill counties. Will we reimburse for that?
We get our incentive money and we get, all of our costs are reimbursed by the federal government, a rate of 2 to 1. And so I think that that's coming out of the origin system and the moving around of cases.
That's no longer the case. There was a pilot project period where only certain DA's offices around the state were on the new computer system. We volunteered to be a part of that, and as part of that, we handled cases from some other counties in order to assist with their integration of the new system. That's now completed because all counties are on the system now.
And it doesn't help to be a volunteer pilot.
No, not these days.
It didn't make things better for us.
Okay, and just one follow-up on Commissioner Sorensen and Mr. Morris. So that letter you got from, we got from Showing Up for Racial Justice, mentioned disproportionate incarceration, and especially for African Americans. It says that, let's see, 2.2% were African American and 7.8% are incarcerated. Is that?
So I can tell you that statistically from the Lane County Jail, at any given time, more than 94% of the population in the jail is white. I can tell you that because it is such a statistically small sample of other racial makeup in our county, that the prosecution of one additional person of a different race is going to statistically show more significantly than the number would show. It's just this is a predominantly white county, and the people who are committing crimes here are predominantly white.
Thank you.
Ms. Sugar?
Thank you, Chair. I apologize for interrupting earlier. I want to just say hello to all of my former colleagues in the DA's office. It's nice to see all of you, and thank you for all of the work that you do every day. And thank you, Ms. Perlow, for your presentation and for all that you're doing for us and with limited resources. I reviewed this letter from Ms. Wilde, and what I walked away from it with was this idea that would there be, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this, would there be some measurable outcome or way that you can track a small amount of data that would help you respond to this, maybe for next year's cycle, right? Like, is there something that you can provide or start tracking that would be helpful? And I think about what the state did at the statewide level with, for example, like tracking the police profiling data, right? It's a really simple fix. It's just starting to track that data so that over time we have information that we can make decisions with. And so instead of us having an anecdotal discussion about what we observe on a point in time of who's in the Lane County Jail or things like that, I guess I wanna just ask you to consider, providing, or starting to track that, maybe one item, maybe two items, that you can then share with us next year.
I would love to know what would be helpful to you for us to track. As I said, we are strictly responsive, and
Right.
so if law enforcement they're only responding to calls for service, they're not initiating. And so, I mean, it's just sort of a domino effect of, I don't know what is going to be meaningful to you in response to this. The assumptions from the outset, a lot of them have absolutely no control from my office. There is data available that's collected by all of us and amassed for the Criminal Justice Commission, but my data specifically is going to be what came into the office and what happened after that fact. So if there is something specific that would be helpful to you, I would be happy to try to provide that.
Well, I don't want to speak for everyone else here, but as I was sort of looking at this and thinking about it, it occurred to me that perhaps we completely understand what you're saying, which is that you're responsive, what comes in the door is what you handle. But that's the same thing for an officer on a call. And so, but we're still tracking, what did they do with that call, and was the person a person in a particular protected class? So you could do the same thing with reports that come into your office. Is the person of a particular protected class, and that, you could pull right from that police profiling list. And then you could say, did I charge it, didn't I charge it? And were they convicted? And that would then allow you to say, here's our data.
But it's not going to tell you how many of those cases were not investigated correctly. It's not going to tell you how many, it's not going to be, we didn't file it because we didn't want to. It's going to be, we didn't file it because there was insufficient evidence to prove it.
Sure.
And so it's going to be meaningless overall to what you want to know. Are we doing our job within what the law establishes and what the rules of ethics establish? I will tell you absolutely that's what we're doing. But to run data that doesn't include, we had an unavailable witness, we had bad search.
Sure.
I can tell you how many cases we don't file for those specific reasons.
Absolutely, and so I think that's why I wanted to put the question to you, was just to say, is there some meaningful way where you could provide that and allay some of the concerns that are laid out here? I don't want to fashion that query for you, but I wanted just to say that seems to me like information that if Multnomah County is able to gather some of it and have it be meaningful in some sort of report, could we do a smaller, less expensive version of gathering that information?
And I guess then I would put back what Multnomah County is providing is meaningful, and to whom. So if the budget committee would like some specific information and I can provide it to you, I will be happy to do that. But I can't make up information and tell you, oh, this is meaningful.
Commissioner Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Sugar, thank you for those questions, because you drilled down to the questions that I was going to ask, and Ms. Perlow, DA Perlow, you answered the questions pretty well. My question was really going to be surrounding what do you have control of? You say you are responsive, and you deal with the cases that are brought before you, and then you winnow out the ones you simply cannot prosecute because of insufficient evidence or bad searches, whatever it may be. Do you actually have any control as to how you move forward regarding some of the allegations in here, regarding racial profiling, regarding who gets sent to jail, who doesn't get sent to jail?
We don't have control over most of that. Pretrial is an arm of the court. We do not have any control over who goes to jail. And in fact, if law enforcement asks us, do we have probable cause to arrest someone, we will tell them you have to answer that question. We're not gonna tell you that you have probable cause.
Yeah.
You have to make that determination. They get to the jail, the reports come to us, we make a charging decision. The defendant is reviewed by pretrial, and they do a risk assessment to determine whether somebody's going to stay in custody or go out of custody. We also have capacity-based releases that are based on risk. And then if a person is still in custody, they go to a judge to ask for a reduction in security. And I'll tell you, I'm not a fan of security. I don't think release decisions should be based on money at all. But that's a subject for another day. But it's the judge who decides what's going to happen. And almost every time, we're going to say, we defer to pretrial services on whether or not the person should be released or not, because we don't know. There are circumstances where the judge has reduced security and really violent people have been released over our objection, but it's not our control on who's there. The recidivism rates have absolutely no control over the recidivism rates. Parole and probation actually is the body that's tasked with supervising people and along with sponsors and trying to get them into a successful position after they're convicted.
Okay. Thank you, DA Fuller. And Mr. Chair, what I'd like to say is that much of the things that we found in this last-minute presentation of a letter, which we got, I believe, was handed to us at the last Budget Committee meeting, and I too have examined it and reviewed it, and I can't really find anything that the DA, inside the DA's office, can do about the points made in this letter. Consequently, without more time to study it, and without more scrutiny, I don't know why we're wasting time, quite frankly. So that being said, back to the budget, you're reducing, what's the amount that's being reduced by?
300 and, well, it's not a done deal.
No, it's not a done deal. I
But
know May 10th is the.
Somewhere in the
appointment,
neighborhood of
excuse me.
$315,000.
115, and your request then, if this were a request-free and a request environment, you know, an open environment for requests, you'd like that amount of money to be replaced out of the general fund. That way you have greater control over what the attorneys can be prosecuting, whereabouts in your team they could fit. Did I read that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
That we, in order to fully address all of the cases that come in the door, we are adequately staffed for that. And for those of you who don't know, I repurposed the chief deputy position to the major crimes team because the level and amount of violent crime in our community is so high that we needed to address that.
So you no longer have a chief
I
deputy?
do not have a chief deputy.
So who's doing the chief deputy's work?
I am.
You are
Thank
doing
you
the chief
very
deputy's
much.
work, okay.
And you're welcome.
That wasn't a softball, that was a hard inside curve. So that's awful. And that is really what we should be grilling you about, is how can we make it easier for you to do your job, not how do we respond to a last-minute letter. So thank you for the information, and as we move forward, we'll think about how we can get you more attorneys.
I don't want more. I don't have any offices.
Well, to replace the ones.
We're working on it.
We're not here to grill the DA.
That's right.
But you can if you want.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you. I think we'll move forward with the sheriff. Cliff Harold, I think we have a name right there. Very good. If you have any additional questions for the district attorney, please provide them to budget staff on the little cards.
I'll have questions about outcomes that really should someone was asking about, who's not here, but she has outcomes.
Here they come. I wonder where you're.
Here comes the support.
Exactly.
Gotta bring the team.
The outcome based on when she took over.
Okay, we
as
won't
DA.
grill him.
I'll just
Those are-
jump in, Chair, if you want, because I know that you're already crunched for time.
I think, yes, please move forward.
All right. Just to address Commissioner Bernie's comment real quick, is that I did bring the team. I was appointed by the board. I interviewed with the board, was appointed by the board. The next day, actually, I had a moment of, holy cow, which has happened. Just a momentary overwhelmed feeling. And then I remembered this group of people that I get to work with, and it completely dissipated because I have a terrific team that I get to work with. And so they're here because they know detailed answers that I may not know. And we want to make sure that we're able to answer questions from the Budget Committee. In the interest of time, I'm just going to jump right into the slides, similar to what DA Perlow said. We'll try and go through the slides and then leave some time for questions. I jumped too fast. So this is how our office is broken up. We technically have 4 divisions, although the office of sheriff is just me and an assistant. And then the other divisions that get the work done every day, and the FTE breakout there. This is our budget by fund type, and in contrast to the DA's budget, which was 100% general fund, you have the significant chunk of the pie there that's special revenue funds. That's made up of both the levy fund supporting the corrections function as well as our special revenue funds. That's our contracts for policing, Crestwell and Bonita. It's our contract with the Bureau of Prisons over at the Regional Police Center, and other similar contracts. The rest of it being general fund, and those internal service funds that's related to our fleet fund. We have a significant need of vehicles in our business, as well as radios, technology, etc. Regarding our resources, again, we have the biggest piece of the pie there, general fund not being represented up there, so the biggest piece of the pie is the levy. And then we also have the breakout, again, of contracts, federal contracts, state money through the Community Corrections Act, the CCA dollars, which that's part of the conversation about the Public Safety Coordinating Council and their budget committee, the funding that comes through that in order to support jail beds and also jail programs under the agreement with the state when Senate Bill 1145 went through, where we're keeping more people locally than sending them to prison. And so the PSCC budget committee refers recommendations to the board. That's part of the dollars that DA Perlow is worried about not having anymore. Here you have our personnel and our M&S capital expenses, again, back to radio technology primarily. Partnerships, seems like each time we're before the budget committee, we do talk a little bit about the way we work with the Oregon State Police, since they are typically also out in rural Lane County, and so oftentimes we have questions, given our struggle to police rural Lane County, about our relationship with OSP. I can tell you that our relationship with the state police has never been better, and it's been good for well over 20 years. We communicate very well with them, and actually communications with them has improved slightly through radio technology for the first time in forever, I think. We actually can hear the Oregon State Police radio on our portable radio. So historically, we had a radio in our car where we could monitor them that was separate than our radio. Today, because of technology, we can get out of our car and hear them on the radio that's on us. Likewise, a trooper can get out of his car and hear us on his radio. So when we co-deploy with them, as we often do, a trooper and a deputy to a domestic dispute, etc., it used to be once they were away from their cars, the only way for them to communicate was face-to-face. And so through technology, we're able to do better. And what sort of anecdotally my observation is that we're back to a place where we have state troopers who hear our call load, they recognize that they're in the area and volunteer to assist us. That's a little more similar to the way it was back when I was first coming up as a deputy. So radio technology actually was better than post 9/11 when it was supposed to get better, it got worse, and now we're back to better. But I've noticed just in my driving to and from the office or whenever I have the radio on that we do have state troopers piping up to go to calls when they hear them and they're nearby. I will point out, though, and I confirmed these numbers with the Springfield Station Commander with the State Police, they still are a significantly under-resourced station, so they have fewer patrol resources even than we do. We have 25 deputies assigned to patrol rural Lane County. They have 17 troopers out of the Springfield office, and so they're not a 24/7 presence, and so they're certainly not able to take our call load, but part of their mission is to assist local law enforcement, and we have a great relationship in which we do that. We also partner with various different agencies that we provide dispatch services for through contracts, to include Oak Ridge Police and Fire, LCC, and Lane County Parole and Probation. I mentioned briefly our police contracts. City of Crestwell and City of Anita have used the sheriff's office as their police provider for many, many years, and we continue that relationship. Oregon State Parks is a grant-funded opportunity for dunes patrol over on the coast, as well as some limited ATV-related or off-highway vehicle-related patrols of federal lands. State Marine Board continues to contract with sheriffs across the state to patrol waterways, and somewhat unique to us is the contract with the BLM, where they contract with us for 2 deputies to assist them patrolling BLM lands. About 20% of our police service division expenditures are related to contract policing, where the money is coming in for a specific police presence, not related to policing rural Lane County or unincorporated Lane County. We partner with the treatment courts and have for some time, primarily through our fiscal office. The state treatment courts aren't able to receive grant funds, so we are the fiduciary for them. And so some of our budget documents look different because we have money coming through the sheriff's office budget for the treatment courts. Similarly with our countywide and actually multi-county radio systems, again, we're the fiduciary, so those are high dollar capital investments for radio infrastructure that goes through our budget, but is a multi-agency resource. Keep moving. We partner regularly with the DEA for the drug take-back. That's actually really been a popular community service. We are frequently requested by other communities when they hear that we're hosting one to please come to their community. We have the drop box in our lobby 24/7. We hosted the drug take-back event in April in Florence and received 144 pounds of medication dropped off, which we then take to be destroyed. We've heard before, I think, a little bit about the way we work with the behavioral health system. There has, for a number of years, been a Lane County Mental Health Summit, which is a monthly meeting, an early morning meeting, whose attendance has grown by well over double through governmental agencies, for-profit and nonprofit agencies attending to try and work together collaboratively on the mental health issue that we have in our community. The group has really built momentum. There are occasions where it feels like we talk about the same thing every month because the problem still exists and the solutions are not easy. But we have, I think, built sort of focus and in a collaborative way towards what we think the community needs, and has a very large impact on the sheriff's office because we need a resource that is a jail diversion resource so that people whose behavior is not conforming with our public order laws based on their mental illness could go somewhere other than jail. The dilemma is that the patrol officer who responds to a call for service from a community member who is impacted by someone's behavior, which is outside of our public order laws, they're expecting a service from their public servants patrol officer. And so currently the patrol officer really has only 2 options, the emergency room or jail. Often if they choose the emergency room, they're going to deal with the problem again within their shift. And if they choose jail, they know that they can at least complete their shift without dealing with the problem again. And so we need, and this group is discussing an alternative to jail that will also help solve the problem and hopefully stabilize the problem. Also, just mentioning along with this, we have designated now a mental health sergeant in our corrections division. He works in the DOMC, who works extensively again with trying to connect folks when they are released from our jail with resources so as to not have them immediately return to our jail. In addition, we have a levy-funded probation officer in our DOMC to help coordinate those efforts in our partnership with Parole Probation. Our administrative division honestly would better be referred to as operations support. Administrative sounds like administrators are soaking up all those dollars, and that's not what the division is. The Office of Sheriff has a number of different statutory requirements that are a little bit unique to law enforcement. For example, concealed handgun licensing, which we're required to do, civil fingerprinting, sex offender registration, a number of those functions. All of our record staff, both police records and jail records, are actually housed in the administrative division. Going back well over a decade, we used to silo them off So there was, jail records were attached to the corrections budget, police records were attached to the police division budget. We also had a more robust management staff at the time. Through budget reductions, our management reductions, we needed to consolidate supervision and management responsibility. And so we brought those support functions into the administrative division, but they serve the other two operational divisions, so it's a little confusing sometimes. Also, in the administrative division, when you're looking at numbers in your proposed budget, again, we have the dispatch radio technology, that's all in there. Radio technology being high dollar stuff. Our Office of Professional Standards, training manager, PIO and community engagement, volunteers, all of that is in the administrative division. Our corrections division is our largest division, thanks to the community support of the public safety levy. I want to highlight the fact that we've been able to really maximize the effect of the levy through time. So the levy was originally passed. It took much longer to hire the staff we needed than we anticipated. Honestly, we have been burning out our HR analysts with constant recruitment, and we're going to have to keep our foot on the pedal for that. We've hired 157 deputy sheriffs in the last 5.5 years, since the levy first passed. We've also been able to strategically apply those levy funds. You've probably heard there is still a portion of the jail that is closed. It's the second floor dorms. Operationally, it is not very feasible to use that space because we don't have the caliber of inmate who lives well in a dormitory. And when we did the analysis of the levy funding, we really didn't think we could afford the staff to fully open it anyway. A better use of those dollars was instead to increase some staffing assignments within the jail. As an example, a particular housing area, which is referred to as 3 South, used to be a single deputy post. Now, during day shift and swing shift, it's a 2-deputy post, but we've moved our mental health socialization program to the 3rd floor. It's a better living environment. There's some natural light, and we have broken the historical rules for corrections facilities. Obviously, we have a significant responsibility to keep our inmates safe, and that's to include from each other. And so we have a classification system for inmates in the jail based on dangerousness and crime level. So for years, everybody knows you don't let a maximum classification inmate be around a medium classification inmate because we have a responsibility to protect, which is true, and that continues to be true in our jail. But when we use the mental health socialization program in 3 South, we have developed a program where we can say, you're a maximum and you're a medium, but while you're up here participating in the program, we can allow you to be together to participate in the program. In order to do that, we needed some additional deputy staffing to continue our obligation to keep everybody safe. But we also have these folks now out of their single cell environment, many more hours a day. They're participating in things like yoga. Mental health specialists are coming out, interacting with them in a group environment as well as one-on-one. So that was one thing that we were able to do with levy funding to maximize our treatment of inmates. Similarly, we increased our staffing in another housing area, which is the area where, upon initial book-in, inmates that have substance abuse or mental health issues, inmates that are on suicide watch, or what we call an intoxicated assessment report, where they need to be checked on frequently by both deputy sheriff staff and medical staff. What we found is that as a single deputy post, medical or mental health was constantly needing to see someone, and the deputy didn't have time. They can't see anybody if there's not a deputy standing there next to the door. And so, again, for day shift and swing shift, we've staffed that at 2 deputies now to make sure that our medical and mental health providers are able to have access to the inmates that they need to see in a timely manner. And then lastly, facility support position, also sort of anecdotally, we have observed a much higher use of needing to take inmates outside the facility for medical care to make certain that we're taking the proper care of them. And so we now have a deputy that's available to do things like check on the safety of the kitchen, but also if we have a medical transport that was unanticipated, we aren't having to call, try to find a staff member to come in. We have somebody on scene or on site that can immediately go to that, and then the sergeant's going to make calls for additional staff if needed. Moving on to our police services division, I do want to point out that the FTE number is a little, well, it gives the wrong impression initially. Only 25 deputies and 6 sergeants are budgeted for providing patrol to unincorporated Lane County. The rest of that number up there is either a specialized enforcement responsibility or a contract policing responsibility. So again, if you consider contract policing of the cities, Marine Patrol, BLM, Dunes Patrol, we also have a requirement to do civil, which is a couple of deputies. We have a couple of search and rescue, FTE. We have 4 detectives and a detective supervisor. And then we have the court security detail, which between court security and transport functions, we've actually been able to increase that so that we can try and serve the courts a little bit better. That's also where we park deputies when we bring them over from corrections and they want to become a patrol deputy, which requires 16 weeks in Salem. We have to pay that person while they're at the academy. They have to be a budgeted position, but we're not getting any work from them. And we currently have 3 a few weeks into the academy, and we're sending 3 more in a few weeks. So that's 6 people that we have no access to for months. And so the numbers we have to have there so that we can actually get people trained and out on patrol and maintain our 24/7 patrol. Some highlights for you, really quick. Again, the community public safety levy has allowed us to maintain a decrease in capacity-based releases. The picture in the middle there is Deputy Darnell, and he's up on that 3 South mental health floor working with an inmate. I want to highlight the left side column photo is one of our volunteers, and we've had a really fantastic volunteer program at the Sheriff's Office forever, search and rescue in particular, but we have hundreds of volunteers that help us with our functions. This particular program started off with our crime prevention team, where they go out and help people assess their homes and ways that they could make it less likely to be victimized. They've also now started helping us out with some of the traffic safety issues. So we are constantly being contacted by neighborhoods wanting speed enforcement that we just simply aren't able to provide. We no longer have a traffic safety team. The volunteers have been for a couple of years helpful in pulling the speed trailer around, which is a sheriff's office function, or a resource rather, that helps remind neighbors that they're speeding down their street a little bit fast. Now we let the volunteers go out, and they've been trained to use a handheld radar gun, and they record speeds and license plate numbers. And we'll send a letter to somebody that says, we recorded you speeding, keep in mind your neighbors, safety, etc. And then there's a little blurb on there that if this continues to be a problem, we might have to come visit you at home. But we've had a really great response to that. And then I can also tell you that the deterrent effect of seeing somebody in a car holding a radar gun out a window, on social media you hear about it. For example, the neighborhood social media Facebook groups, they'll all tell you that they're out there. Talking about future challenges, of course, we know that the Corrections Division is in a much better place because of the levy, but we have as yet been unable to address the way that we provide police services to unincorporated Lane County. And it's difficult for somebody that's been around for so long because we've been talking about it for so long, and yet it just feels like so much of our community does not realize that right at this moment, if someone called 911 from Dune City south of Florence and needed a police response, most likely it would come from Eugene. And similarly, if McKenzie Bridge needs us, or if east of Oak Ridge needs us, unless there's a state police trooper closer than us, and oftentimes they're going with us. This call map is actually a screenshot from our dispatch, computer-aided dispatch. This is from April 25th at 11:30 a.m. And this is a fairly light call load. There's 18 calls on the screen. And you can see they're clustered around our urban area because that's where the population is the highest. But most shifts, and I can tell you at 11:30 a.m., we had 3 deputy sheriffs and a sergeant on duty for this call load. That screen gets really ugly at around 10 p.m. Swing shift deputies, usually about 3 deputies and a sergeant. We do currently staff for some overlap between swing shift and graveyard, so we have some overlap during our highest call volume. But then we'll go down to only 2 deputies and a sergeant when swing shift goes home at 2 in the morning. So this is a future challenge. This is the challenge we've been working on for 20 years. And it's still there, and it's still something that we're trying to figure out how to fix. DA Perlow mentioned our fatality rates in Lane County is very, very high, especially when compared to statewide. When I first came to patrol in 1997, I was assigned to our traffic safety team that we used to have with a traffic safety focus. Through budget reductions, we weren't able to sustain that program, and today, not only do we not have a traffic safety team, but the deputies that we do have out there have no time to do any sort of proactive work. They are going from call to call, as you saw on that call screen. Without a doubt, we know that enforcement is a significant part of traffic safety. If you don't have enforcement and all you have is engineering and enforcement, you're missing 33.3% of what it takes to affect traffic safety. And so this is going to continue to be an issue for Lane County until we find a solution. And I can tell you that our office really frequently hears from folks like out Mackenzie Highway or really anywhere in the county about the way that people drive today compared to 20 years ago. There was a reputation that when you get into Lane County, you better slow down. And we've lost that, unfortunately. We do have some capital issues. We're doing a lot better now with our facilities committee and our capital improvements manager. The communication has gotten really good, and most of that was on our side. We weren't being communicative enough about the issues of our aging infrastructure at the jail. And so we've made that connection now, and I'm feeling good and optimistic about it. Of course, that doesn't mean that the capital fund is full of dollars to address all the issues, but the issues are being identified and scheduled, and so that's an improvement. These are some significant ones, and we actually recently had a meeting where some of them were identified as high priorities for the capital improvements manager, which I appreciate. Here's how we fit into your strategic, not your strategic plan, our strategic plan. Without a doubt, the Safe Healthy County piece is the piece that we, well, anybody that gets into this line of work, that's what you latch onto, is that's our goal. That's what we're responsible for. And wanted to leave you with some nice photos. We are not animal services, nor are we asking to be. But we did include a couple of pictures with some animals in them. And the baby happens to be a newborn to one of our deputies that I got to go see. So. I wanted to leave you too with, this is going off my script, but talking about partnerships, talking about the Public Safety Coordinating Council, which was discussed during DA Perlo's conversation, and sort of just to make sure that the Budget Committee is aware that the board received an update from the PSCC on the Community Public Safety Repair Plan. So members of PSCC got together to address the system as a whole, and just as DA Perlo pointed out, it is so interrelated. It really can't be looked at as silos. And so the plan was presented in January. It's available online, and it discusses how we have been able to repair functions within the public safety landscape since the layoffs that started in 08. From 08 to 12, the sheriff's office lost about 200 positions and laid off about 100 people. There have been repairs, obviously the corrections division. We as a county have been able to make repairs to the DA's office, which has been beneficial in the CCA allocation for the state. And frankly, we need to keep those because we need the DA's office to continue to file on cases that are provable, so that we can continue to receive the percentage of state funds that are available through the CCA. But I would point out that the document speaks to several different parts of the system that have gotten to make some improvements, and one area that has not made any improvements, which would be, again, the policing of unincorporated Lane County. So with that, I'll be quiet and be ready to take questions.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the great presentation, Sheriff. And I love the picture second from the left, which I think is a campaign kissing baby. I stole that one. We can talk about rural patrol and some of the areas that we pray for more resources for you. But I want to talk about, very briefly, about the way you use existing resources. And what's happened over the last few years is, from my perspective, the Sheriff's Department has redirected its gaze a little bit, focusing more heavily on behavioral health and mental health issues and keeping people from going to jail in the first place. I want to point out that the other night, last Thursday, I believe it was, you were at the Equity and Access Board meeting, and Lieutenant Mann was there, and Captain Doyle was there, and Sergeant Carver was there, and Chief was there. And it was a great presentation that you made, but one thing that really stood out about that was you talked out loud, and for more than half your presentation was talking about something that you talked about here at the beginning, a way to keep people from who are arrested from being taken to the jail as a default. You stated that currently people are arresting officers have two choices: emergency room, which kind of is not really a choice at this point in time because they're not really accepting people, or the jail. If you take them to the emergency room, you'll see them later on in your shift. If you take them to the jail, well, at least you won't see them later on in your shift. So so what you're calling for is something that was first brought to my attention during the Mental Health Summit, and we'll hear more about this later on in the budget presentation, and that is a crisis center, a place to take people who are in crisis, in behavioral health, substance use crisis, instead of taking them to the jail. We'll see a small amount of money that's being requested in this budget for that, but it really is something that is talked about a lot at the Mental Health Summit, and it's not just the officers talking about it. It's the mental health professionals, it's people from the courts, it's people from the physical health as well as the mental health who really are demanding or calling for a crisis center. We'll talk more about that later. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is something that Chief Wilkerson said. And impromptu, you were called up in front of the Equity and Access Board, and a question was asked you about hate crimes. How do you respond to hate crimes? And I'd love to put you on the spot and say, could you say how you respond to hate crimes?
Yeah, so one of the things we discussed in partnership with the FBI is that there's some gaps in bias and hate crimes, and the fact that at the state law level, a criminal mischief, even if it's a swastika on somebody's house, a Jewish person's house, is still a criminal mischief. So in our cooperation with the FBI, we've determined, along with Eugene Police Department and I think Springfield Police Department is going to cooperate with this as well, is that anything that has that flavor or flair of hate or bias by the perception of the reporting party, we're going to forward all of those reports to the FBI. The reason behind that is they actually have some different statutes than we have, and at least one case locally, they've taken different cases in different jurisdictional areas, Corvallis, Eugene, and in Benton County, and we're able to actually put a federal case against what would otherwise just be minor state crimes, and put a federal case together. So that cooperation of us doing that information share with FBI at little to no cost to ourselves has been good.
And the point that I drew from that is that some crimes that really don't percolate to the top of high investigation, when they're amassed with other crimes, all of a sudden you have a case potentially with higher statutory response. And I had no idea that was happening. And when I talk about you using your money most effectively to address the areas of greatest need, I think about behavioral health and I think about hate and bias crimes. And really you're describing, I measured how much time you spent on mental health, for instance. It was a little bit less than 30% of your presentation was on mental health today. Mokrahaisky had you beat the other day. He was more like 37%. But it really gives me an idea that you're taking the resources that you have, notwithstanding our abysmal rural patrol and our abysmal response to the urban transition areas where people live in the city but require the sheriffs inside the urban growth boundary outside the city limits, require the sheriffs, and you guys are responding to Florence or Mackenzie Bridge or someplace in between, and you're not going to River Road because you simply can't do it. Not talking about that, but with the money that you are spending, the resources that you are spending, you're nailing it right upstream, hitting the upstream portion of it, creating more space downstream, and it's very impressive. I took a lot of heart from the presentation you made to the Equity and Access Board, and you'd left. Or else, I swear that it carried you out on their shoulders that night. It was a very good response that we got from those folks. So I'm not going to talk about some of the things that perhaps Commissioner Bozovich is going to talk about, and others about how do we find more rural patrol, how do we find more response in the urban transition. But a good job on using the resources that you do have in averting upstream some of the things that cause more serious problems if you let them go downstream. Thank you, Sheriff.
Again, Ms. Sugar.
Thank you, Chair. Sheriff, I just want to say hello to everyone from the sheriff's office. Thank you all for what you do every day and for keeping us safe. I wanted to check in with you on two points. With the courthouse security and transport service that you provide, will there be some either savings or improvement of service when there's a new courthouse?
Absolutely will be improvement of service. And I've said consistently that the courts, on a regular basis, sacrifice efficiency for our security needs. And yet we're still not doing it in a very as secure manner as we should be.
Sure.
So improvement of service for certain. The model would include by-floor court holding versus having a courtroom of people, including judges, staff, and attorneys, waiting for us to go downstairs to sheriff's holding using a 1950s era elevator to get them back to the courtroom.
I've been in that elevator.
So improvement of service for certain. I do not believe that we would be able to reallocate people that are assigned to that function today. Because the reality is I think that we are still understaffed in that function. But I think that the number of people we have doing it today will be able to provide an exceptional service to the court that we have been unable to provide in the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you. And then the other, and I don't mean to steal anyone else's planned questions, but I grew up in rural Lane County, and it makes me very nervous to think about the lack of rural patrol, especially out where my parents still live. And so I just wanted, and I absolutely agree with your assessment of the concerns regarding traffic safety in this county. So I just wanted to, putting the puppies and babies aside, I wanted to ask you what do we need? I mean, I would like to know if you could put it together and you had more funding, what would you do with the rural Lane County Patrol and how would you make it work?
Love the question.
Okay.
Let's dream. I'm on board. So, and I'm going to refer real quick again to the PSCC Community Public Safety Repair Plan, and there's a specific section for patrol, sheriff's office, police forces increases that we would be looking for. We have a police executive research forum, we call it PERF, a PERF report. It's a few years old now, but they came in at Tom Turner's request. Tom's request was, is there anything we can do with the people we have to do this better? And they came in and said, we can't believe that you're accomplishing what you accomplish. Their opinion was we needed a minimum of 30 deputies to do what we said we were already doing.
With 25.
And we're doing it with 25 today. So that's continuing to send forms in the mail to people who have victimized property crimes. That's continuing to call people whose personal home was broken into and burglarized, which is a very personal feeling crime. It's not classified as a person's crime, but I remember when my grandparents' house was burglarized and my mom and I showed up. It feels very like a personal violation. Better than 50% of the time, we're calling those people on the phone hours later to take a report, which gives them no feeling that we care, which of course we do, but it's hard to communicate that in a phone call hours after the event. What communicates caring is they come home, they find out their home's been broken into, and a deputy sheriff shows up and talks to them in person and takes a report. And, so we're, not changing any of the way we currently handle those calls. 30 is what they told us we needed. Our deputies have zero proactive, zero discretionary patrol time. So the first ask would be to go from 25 to 30. And then
But that still doesn't get you the personal response to the burglary.
It does not. But that's the foundation. And,
Okay.
and that's where I was headed next is I am in agreement with Sheriff Trapp that you have to build the foundation of a house before you can to add on. I'm not so adamant about that if there was a funding mechanism to do something about traffic safety that didn't exist for getting those 5 main office deputies, I'd still want to have the conversation. I'm not completely, we have to get to 30 in main office before we can address anything else. I'm open to suggestions and ideas. But we know for sure we need to get to 30 patrol deputies. We know for sure we need to do something about addressing traffic safety, and that's going to require having some deputies that do have discretionary patrol time to do proactive things. We know for sure that 4 detectives for population, we serve about 110,000 people. I don't have it right here in front of me, you guys might remember it. Springfield serves.
Springfield has 68,000 and 14 detectives. Gene PD's 168,000 with about 30 assigned to their deputy division.
So even just having a detective that could work on electronic evidence, which is a huge piece of every criminal case now. And we have a patrol deputy who we were able to give some special training to, and sometimes we can pull him off of a patrol shift to deal with electronic evidence, which is really not acceptable. That, and we beg our partners to help us sometimes. But that's a key investigative piece that we need. And then frankly, to be able to address property crime in Lane County, not only do you need the deputy to go out and take the report, but you have to have an investigative resource. The problem we have now is a patrol deputy takes the report, and I've said this before, but everybody that wears this uniform really wants to deliver a good service. And it's hard on us to go and take a burglary call that actually has some things that you want to go do some follow-up investigation on, but you have 15 more calls waiting for you. And so you think, well, I'll put this in a file folder and put it in my seat, and maybe next shift I can get to it. And the next shift you show up at briefing and there's 25 calls pending for you. So you have to have an investigative resource that isn't part of the uniform response to do property crime follow-up that we don't have today.
Thank you.
Mr. Sternberg.
I'll be quick, but I was having coffee with Dan Buckwell before this about something else, but what came up was the socialization program. And I've been around on the budget committee for a while, and you ever so briefly touched on it, but it hasn't really been talked about. And hearing him talk about it was, special. Incredibly special. So can you touch on that really quick about what it is and what you're doing with it, and especially in relation to mental health?
I could touch on it really quick, but Clint could touch on it better.
Perfect.
Yes, I don't know what Dan told you about that, but we started it's probably been a couple years ago. We started looking at those folks. 16.
Clint, could you come up to the table so the mic's picked you up?
Oh, you bet. Thank you. Just a quick little background on that. Probably 60 to 70% of folks that are in jails nowadays are diagnosed with some sort of mental illness, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. So 60 to 70% of our population in jail has mental health issues. So we started really focusing on trying to create a housing area where we had similar like folks up there, and then bringing mental health services to them and doing different things in the jail that the sheriff touched on, such as socialization, which is bringing people out, having them socially interact, eat meals together. And then we started doing group activities and yoga and a few things like that. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a decrease in use of force, a decrease in anxiety and tension amongst that population of people. It's made better working environment for us and our staff, and better living environments for them. There's lots of folks that in their criminal behavior, their mental illness creates the criminal behavior that puts them in jail, which is the Talk for the Crisis Center that we talk about, the mental health summit every month. And so we've focused on trying to deal with those folks differently in jail. We've trained our deputies different. We work with mental health, and I don't have data to show it, but I would say our use of force and our issues with inmates in the jail has decreased, and it's better living conditions and better working environment for us. And so
I can tell you that deputies can identify by name inmates that they remember really, really having a difficult time managing, that now they are able to manage through this program. The other thing that I think is impressive about this program is at least weekly we have a multidisciplinary meeting. So there's a uniformed sergeant there who's really responsible for the security function. There's a medical person there that's responsible for the medical part. There's a mental health professional there. And they are doing weekly planning on the top 10 folks that are hard to manage in the jail, to look at it from all angles and figure out what's the management plan for this person to try and keep them safe, keep our staff safe, etc.
And just one last little piece, I haven't talked to Captain Buckwell in a while, but we just had a meeting yesterday. Our next move is to move it from programmings to services and start figuring out the ones that we're having a hard time getting services to now are the one-on-ones that are in the cells that just can't come out with other people. The environment I just talked about is great, but that's not for everybody. Some people are too disruptive, or their issues don't allow them to come out with other people because safety is our most important thing there. So we're going to try to start bringing services to inmates that are in single cells that can't come out in those group activities. And so we're focusing on that. And we're also we reshifted some money around too, and we now have 6 mental health people with our WellPath medical contract. And we're going to focus on the time that they're in our facility and our care, what can we do with their mental health there, as well as continue to do the handoffs around the community as well. So,
That's awesome, thank
did
you.
that answer your questions?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Anybody else before I go back over?
We'll move forward. Mr.
Wait, you
Abel.
can't go back?
So, Sheriff Harold, you certainly hit the ground running in a few weeks, it seems. I have a few quick questions. It says that Lane County consistently remains the second highest user of beds. The Oregon State Hospital more than double our allotted. What is our allotted input?
That's a Karen Gaffney question, because I don't know it off the top of my head, but I can speak to what's going on there.
29.
Okay, 29, thank you. Not only, so DA Perlow is dealing with the circuit courts, but we have a couple municipal courts, we have several municipal courts in the county, but a couple who are very active in dealing with mentally ill population. So Eugene Municipal Court would be the biggest, but I'll tell you both Eugene Municipal Court and Springfield Municipal Court are represented in the monthly mental health senate meetings. What's going on with overuse of state hospital? Because the patrol officer is trying to solve a problem, and charging someone with a crime and putting him in jail solves the problem for his shift. The court system, the judicial system says, okay, is this person capable of participating in their defense? Key concept for American justice. And the court doesn't really have any option but to say, well, let's send him to the state hospital to make the determination. And so our use is way too high according to the state, primarily because of municipal offenders who, in the municipal court, they're being sent to the state hospital to determine if they can aid in their defense. They're not getting treatment up there, by the way. A lot of people think that they are. What they're getting is class. Do you know what a judge is? Do you know what a prosecutor is? And then oftentimes, the clock runs out on how much time they can send there. They get sent back to our jail to be immediately released, having never been adjudicated on the original crime because they've already spent so much time in custody that it doesn't matter what the adjudication of the original crime is. And there's no planning for how to release them from our jail. So we're not handing them off to a provider. We get them back from the state hospital and it's time served out the door to most likely be arrested again because they go back to causing a problem.
Let's see. Oh, yeah, so in the budget for corrections, taxes and assessments are up $3 million, so it's like 21% increase. Do you know what that is?
For the levy rate change. Yeah. So I was talking about how we've been able to maximize the levy. And early on when the levy first passed, we weren't able to hire deputies quickly enough. So we started accumulating a lot of reserves because we weren't paying the people that we had hoped to hire. So then the sheriff asked the budget committee not to levy the full rate because we didn't need it to build up more reserves if we weren't spending the dollars. We've caught up. We've maximized what the levy can provide for corrections functions as the community has indicated support for. And so that would be the increase, is that for the levy to be levied at the full rate to support those positions that I outlined, supporting the mental health socialization, medical and mental health down in intake, and medical transports.
Okay. Thank you. And just one more. If I can find it. Yeah, when you were talking about FTEs, I thought you said there were like 70 in police services, is that right?
That is right.
But the budget says 66 and a half.
So with our court security transport function, our sheriff's office has historically run that out of the police services division. Many sheriff's offices run court transport out of their corrections division. So what we have now is a portion of that funded with levy funding as part of the corrections division, and a portion of it funded with general fund, which has historically been part of the police division. And so after the budget documents were prepped, we had an internal discussion about operationally how to deal with that. And we haven't made an official decision, but our thought is we're going to continue the general fund portion under the court security function of, that should be a police services function, and continue the levy funded portion under the corrections division, which is a prisoner transport function. If you didn't have a full jail, you wouldn't need to have those transport deputies. So you could actually move that number over to the corrections division, and that's probably what you have in your note.
Okay, thanks.
Sheriff Harold, real quick, there are 2 incorporated cities who have contract services, is that right?
Correct.
And are they in basically the same state as far as policing, as far as the hours of coverage and the coverage for what crime there is out there?
So we do a better job of providing service in those cities to property crime, because the deputies that they pay for are responsible for a much smaller portion of people. And so they do get a different level of response to burglaries, etc. Currently, neither city is able to support a 24/7 operation. So primarily we have a days and a swings covered in both city. And then when things happen in those wee hours when we're the lowest staffed, it just falls to general county patrol. If it's, anytime there's not a city-funded deputy on duty, then their level of service provided defaults to the standard for countywide. Is that making sense?
It does.
So it's only if a city paid for deputy is on duty do they get a more city response, which is a deputy in person.
But those shorthanded shifts align, is that correct?
Yes.
So the bad guys know there's no deputies out there or not,
Yeah.
staffed
Unfortunately.
in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
so.
Both cities have made efforts to try and do their own funding mechanism to increase coverage. I know Creswell continues to have conversations about how they could get to 24 coverage, and similarly, I believe that Bonita continues to have those conversations, but similar to what we experience is the cities battling their own budgets and personnel costs increasing faster than tax revenues.
But it sounds like both those relationships are good between the sheriff's
Definitely,
office.
yeah.
Cities.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it for the sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, looking at the time, I have 12 minutes after. I would recommend that we cut this break down to 5 minutes to try to gain a little bit of time back. Seeing no objections to that, we're going to start again at 3:17 Cupertino time.
There are
is Health and Human Services, Behavioral Health and Youth Services. Karen Gaffney.
Excellent. Good afternoon. I'm Karen Gaffney, the Director of County Health and Human Services, and we do things by team at H&HS. So today we have at the table our team that represents Behavioral Health and Youth Services, and then around the edges we have our team that is in the rest of the department who will be here with you tomorrow. So I'd like to start just by brief introductions, and then we'll get going if that works for you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Andrea, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Andrea Musican, the Assistant Director of Health and Human Services.
I'm Kathleen Fronter, Division Manager, Youth Services. Pauline Martin, Behavioral Health.
Sean Wade, Finance and Administrative Manager.
Dr. Ledke, Chief Medical Officer.
Carla Tazimal, Developmental Disability Services.
Lisa Roth, Trillium Behavioral Health. Jocelyn Warren, Public Health Manager.
Ron Gell, Manager of the Community Health Centers.
Lisa Willis, Clinical Financial Services Manager.
And Lisa Nichols, Quality and Compliance Manager.
Right, so that is our leadership team, and we'll add Steve Manila when we're back again tomorrow. We have, it's truly a pleasure to be able to share some of the amazing work that's happening at Health and Human Services. And we are a large department doing a wide variety of services, so it's a challenge to be able to give you any in-depth sense of the work that we do. So we'll do our very best today to give you an overview of the work of our department and then leave plenty of time for questions and comments. We wanted to start today particularly because the work that we do is really about people in Health and Human Services. So it's about people, our staff, people, our clients. So last month we had an all-staff meeting, which is something we do only about every 5 years because the only venue in this community large enough to hold our department anymore is the fairgrounds. So we had an all-staff meeting, a big deal for us, and Jason Davis, our Public Information Officer, and his intern put together a brief video, interviewed some of our staff, some of our clients to talk a little bit about their experience at Health and Human Services. So we'd like to take just a few minutes up front to show you that, to give you a little bit of a window into the culture in our department, and then we'll go through the slide deck as well. So.
Public health is just such a wonderful arena to work in because it gives us so much, gives individual staff members so much opportunity to influence change.
I grew up knowing that I wanted to help people, that this job fulfills that.
I'm driven to connect to my community, and this is definitely more than a job for me. It's created. This is my passion. This is what I'm here every day.
I want to be a friend, a mentor, a healthy person that they look up to, they feel loved, they care for.
Yay! I can 100% say that without this place, I was destined to be in prison, if not dead. To come here through the youth services and see people that believe in me and successful people have really motivated me to get my stuff together and get back on track with my life.
What they do, or willing to do. I think the work for a community has something like this.
So they want to make sure that I feel human. They want to make sure that
we both are on the same level, and they listen to my word, they listen to my accounts of what happened, and they want to make sure that I feel good, and they genuinely help me.
Where I'm from, there's nothing like this. You know how people work with the community, or it's basically sink or swim.
To go from hopeless to hopeful, I have to tell you, is priceless, and I couldn't be happier. The services that I'm receiving.
Our job here is to advocate, that idea that equality is not the same for everybody. This is what it looks like, and that everybody has different backgrounds that require different types of assistance.
We have the opportunity to do that, especially when we work together and we have the same goals and the same values in mind. We can accomplish the work together to help improve the environments in our community.
We all love being in Lane County, and we all want it to be the best and healthiest county ever.
When they leave that door, I know I did my job because they felt happy, because they say, okay, thank you, you're there for me in my difficult times, losing my loved one, but nobody else cares, but you do. Thank you for that.
We're gonna use that music for the rest of the presentation. It'll be great. So, all right. So thank you for taking just a few minutes to meet a few of our staff and our clients. We purposefully didn't label where those people were from because the point in our staff meeting was really demonstrating that as a department, we work together, we integrate our services to make a difference in the community. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the specific client stories or staff who were there. So let's go to this next slide. This is an overview of Health and Human Services and the 10 divisions that make up our department. Today we're going to talk about the ones that are in yellow, Behavioral Health and Youth Services. I want to ask you, can you see if I'm sitting here? Would you like me?
I can.
Okay. Yes. So I'm happy to move if I'm in anyone's way. So that's where our focus will be today, and then tomorrow we'll be here to talk about the other 8 divisions and their budgets.
You can sit down if you want.
I like you so much. All right, our budget. Let's start to look at the 1920 proposed budget. Our total operating budget is about $128 million, $0.3 million. This graphic is a little bit odd because it's all one piece. Basically, the story it tells is that all of our funds are in special revenue funds, and we've listed there on the side of the slide the funds that make up our budget. We have 6 different funds in Health and Human Services. And again, the divisions that we're talking about today include Behavioral Health, which is in Fund 286, our Health and Human Services Fund, and Youth Services, which is actually in 2 different funds, 289, and then the local option levy funds are in Fund 290, separate from that. Overall, our resources you can see they come from a variety of services. Department resources include both the revenues and the transfers in, not our beginning fund balance. The state is the largest piece of the pie that's up there in orange, and followed closely behind by federal funds and fees, which include the reimbursements and charges. One of the important pieces from this slide is the amount of general fund. Our department, only about 9% of our budget is funded by transfers in from the general fund. That's a little more than $11 million, and the largest chunk of that goes to youth services that we'll be talking about today, and then significant amounts in public health and human services, and a tiny bit into behavioral health for a commitment investigator. Again, we're estimating the state revenues. As you know, the legislature's still in session, so we did our best job at guessing those revenues, and we'll make any adjustments at technical once the legislature finishes their session. Next one. Budget details. Again, there are no real significant changes in FTE or expenditures in these 2 divisions, so this slide focuses on behavioral health and youth services. The materials and services in our H&HS budgets includes subcontracts with nonprofits. Clearly the largest column in our budget is personnel expenses. We're in the business of helping people, and the way we do that is by employing people. So that's the largest slice of our budget, but we do have significant revenues in subcontracted services. If you talk to almost any nonprofit in this community, they would tell you that they receive some funds and contracts for services through our department. Behavioral health funding is a fee-for-service model, and as Pauline talks to you a little bit about those services, much of that revenue is generated by the people we're able to see through behavioral health, and the changes in state and federal budgets certainly impact those services. I do want to talk a little bit on the youth services levy funds. You may have noticed there's a decrease in the budget for youth services out of those levy funds, and that was with intention. The Board and Budget Committee last year approved expenditures into youth services that would allow us to build sufficient reserves in that program to match the same level of reserves that are in the Sheriff's Office. We've achieved that now, and so there's a reduction this year that corresponds to that. Partnerships. I already talked about the nonprofit community. Much of our work is in building systems, so the mental health system in our community, the juvenile justice system in our community, and we do that through partnerships. We listed a few key partnerships here on the slide. There are many more that we can talk about. Public Safety Coordinating Council, my guess is perhaps in the sheriff's budget, in the DA's budget, you might have talked some about that too. That's the place where all of the significant system players come together to coordinate programming and find ways to meet unmet needs, so we're significant in that. The Mental Health Summit is another one that I would lift up, and I think the county administrator might have mentioned that in the budget address, and my guess is we'll talk about it some under special initiatives. That Mental Health Summit is the place we've been meeting for a couple of years now that includes all of our public safety partners, law enforcement, judges, district attorneys, public defenders, as well as the behavioral health system to come together again to work on, problem solve that intersection between behavioral health and public safety. So that's an important one for us. And then I think I would also lift up for you the treatment courts. Lane County Health and Human Services has been an important player since the beginning of treatment courts in our community, which started with drug courts, and we now have Veterans Court, mental health court at the circuit court, and municipal courts. Really finding those creative, alternative, evidence-based ways to help people be accountable and receive treatment so that they can really return to the community in the best way possible. All right, so on that, we're going to toss it over to Pauline to talk about behavioral health.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure and a passion of mine to talk about behavioral health. And I'll be talking about some of the services that fall or are housed under behavioral health, and then some of the focus going on into the next year and probably beyond. So the focus of behavioral health is primarily individual and family wellness, which we do through community connections. Like Karen mentioned, we have a lot of partnerships with a lot of community partners, and a lot of our work involves that collaboration with the larger community. Some of the services that are housed under behavioral health are adult outpatient program. Under that program, we serve people who experience severe and persistent mental illness, and oftentimes people who are also have a co-occurring disorder, and who primarily would not be seen anywhere else. So there are people under OHP or Medicaid that would not be able to access services anywhere else. So we are mostly the safety net for that population in our community. We also serve children and youth through an outpatient program in the clinic, and also do outreach at the schools. So we have some of our clinicians go out to the school and provide behavioral health services. We also have the forensic services, which serve our severely, persistently mentally ill people who also interface in some way with the criminal justice system. So those are through the jail intercept. We're looking at diverting people from the jail. People under the psychiatric review security board, so those who have pleaded guilty except for insanity and have gone through stabilization, oftentimes through the state hospital or some community treatment, and are safe to be supervised in the community. So we have a staff member that liaises between the PSRB and the county to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. Under that forensic program, we have the aid and assist population, and we have, fortunately, us having a lot of people under community restoration within that population. We know that it's still a crisis in our community, and we'll be talking about some of the efforts towards addressing that need. Another unit under forensic is the civil commitment services. And we have a section of our staff who do civil commitment investigations and are also called upon to testify either for or against civil commitment. And under that too, we have the mental health codes. Those are people who are mandated through the criminal justice system to receive treatment under behavioral health. The other service under behavioral health is medication-assisted treatment. So these are people who are experiencing challenges with opioid addiction. This is also a crisis in our community, actually in the nation. And we are looking at ways to meet the need of that populations, in effect, to make sure that people are seen as quickly as possible and reduce any wait lists. So under the medication-assisted treatment, we have the methadone program and buprenorphine. The other service is the crisis services. Like I said, we are the safety net for majority of the severely and persistent mentally ill folks in our community. So we get a lot of calls which we will address in-house or make referrals to our community partners. The other unit under behavioral health is adult protective services investigations, who work very closely with the state to address any allegations of abuse or neglect for those who are under our care. And in the coming years and beyond, we'll be looking at, like I said, under the medication-assisted treatment, implementation of the habit spoke to address the crisis with the opioid. So the hub will be a place where people will receive acute services, and then they're referred to the spoke for maintenance and continued stabilization. I do want to say that behavioral health is also under the umbrella of the federally qualified health centers. And what that means is we have both mental health or behavioral health and primary care provided under the same roof. So we are addressing both medical, physical needs as well as psychological, behavioral needs. As we all know, most of our people who are diagnosed with a mental illness, their life expectancy usually is a lot shorter than their counterparts who are not diagnosed with a mental illness. So this gives us an opportunity to address medical needs, to address them through preventative measures so they don't become a crisis, and that reduces cost overall. The focus in the coming year is to expand access to child and adult outpatient, and you'll see in a slide later on the demand continues to increase for our services. We continue to see a trend upwards for our services, so we want to make sure that people are accessing those services as quickly as they can. We're seeing a need for services within the youth too, so, usually through the K through 12. We're seeing an increased need in the high schools too, as well as our community colleges. It's looking at ways to make sure that we are reaching the people that need our services. The other focus is in the aid and assist program within our community, and looking at ways to identify or create more beds in our community, so we are reducing the number of folks in the jails and in the state hospital. And with that, I would also add that we are looking at more collaboration with the judicial system to see ways that we can work together to maintain and support the population in the community. Another initiative is developing rural mental health access, which, as you all know, there is very limited mental health access in the rural communities. And we will be looking at a pilot project with Florence to start kind of looking at ways to get services to the rural communities. Those are some of the communities that are calling us with a lot of need, especially with the youth and high schoolers needing more services in the school. And with that, it's increased collaboration with the schools, looking at how we can partner to bring services to the community schools and or rural communities as well. And lastly, it's looking at ways to integrate primary, or better ways to work with the primary care. Again, like I said, to make sure that we are looking at a person as a whole. That way we are addressing both physical and behavioral needs. And that's behavioral health, and with that, I'll turn it over to Nathalie with Youth Services.
Alrighty. So again, Nathalie Frenner with Youth Services. I'm just going to touch on our different work units that we have there. We have our administration work unit, and that's where we do our grants and our analyst work, our accounting work, and our kind of contracts management runs out of our admin unit. Our detention, we have 16 beds in our detention facility, and that houses both males and females, ages 12 to 17, up to their 18th birthday. We'll be able to hold on to them there. We have our county youth that are there. We also have youth that are being charged as adults or housed at the juvenile detention. And then also we have beds that also Oregon Youth Authority uses as well. When they have Lane County kids that have a PV or a warrant, they'll be housed at our location until they're able to arrange for a transfer up into state custody. Our diversion program, we have a robust diversion program for youth. So for youth that are coming in on that they're low risk to commit additional crimes, and they have low-level crimes that they've committed or offered the opportunity to do diversion. We've greatly expanded that over the last year or so. It used to be that only kids that were in 4J or some kids that were in Springfield had access to diversion, and we have made that so that all youth in Lane County have the access to diversion opportunities. We've recently instituted a crime impact class at the beginning of this year through some funds through the Serbu Foundation, so that kids, when they're coming in for their first low-level referral, are able to come in and learn about what the impact of that is, right? They know what the impact is on them. They're sitting in the chair there, but to also get a sense of what does that mean for my community, for my parents, for my school, for the person that was harmed by my crime, to really give them more of that concept about what that is when harms are created in a community. Our nutrition program, their culinary arts was recognized this morning at the board meeting, so I thank you for that. And for those of you who were there, it was a wonderful opportunity for the youth and the staff, not only to be recognized for the work that they do, but the youth that are part of that program get educational credits for being there, so they're able to do some credit recovery. And I thought it was a great civics lesson for them this morning to be able to hear the board at work talking about bills that are going to be impactful or could be impactful to their lives or their peers. And so I thought the timing of that was really great for them to be able to see that support from the board. So thank you. Our nutrition does 50,000 meals and snacks every single year, and so they provide all the food for the youth that are in detention and our residential treatment program and in our community school, as well as prepare all the food for the youth when they're going out on our community service crews. And so it's a hopping kitchen down there for those of you who've been down there. Our probation services is where we have our youth that are higher at risk to reoffend or have higher level crimes, and so they will go through a probation process. Generally, those will last up to 9 months or a year. Youth who've committed sexual offenses generally go about up to 18 months and sometimes longer, and that's because their treatment for that takes a lot longer, and so we hold those kids with us a little bit longer through that process. And so it's also where we have our juvenile drug court as well as housed through our probation office as well. So we're talking about the treatment courts, and we have one at Youth Services as well. Education, we have our MLK Education Center that does, coordinates all the education for youth that are detained, youth in our residential program, and also community youth who aren't able to be in their home school. It's absolutely designed as a transitional program to get kids back into their home school, because kids do better when they are around their peers within their home school in that way. But it does give those youth that are involved in the justice system who aren't able to make it in their school right now the opportunity to still be earning credits and then be able to transition back. Our community service crews are going out into the community and doing a lot of partnership work with BLM and the Forest Service, the City of Eugene. They also do all the grounds maintenance at youth services, and it gives the kids an opportunity to be able to do their community service within a coordinated system, learn skills while they're doing that, and also earn some restitution funds to be able to pay back to the victims for the crimes that they committed as well. Our victim services, we added just a couple years ago due to support from the folks here, being able to have a full-time victim advocate at youth services to be able to focus on victims of youth crime. And so generally with victim services, the services don't come into play until an actual court case has been filed, and we're able to, with our staffing, be able to do that from the get-go, whether a case actually goes to a formal court proceeding or not, that we're able to provide services to those victims. And then we also have our Phoenix program, which is our residential treatment program. It's a behavioral treatment program. We also do alcohol and other drug treatment as an add-on component to that, but it's primarily a behavioral treatment program, and has 16 beds. It's also open to both males and females in that program. The average is around 6 months that kids would be staying in that program. And recently, within this year, have been able to have some bed space for kids when they're brought in by law enforcement and they have non-detainable charges or detainable, but the risk score says to release them prior to moving forward in the system. And if nobody's available to pick them up, that we're able to have them stay in one of those beds over there versus adding to their trauma by being housed in a detention facility when they shouldn't be housed there. So that's been a great benefit as well. We've really been focusing, and as part of the county strategic plan, on having a stronger continuum of diversion programming and to really be able to make sure that we're giving the right services to the right kid at the right time. Incentivizing youth for goal achievement. We've been doing a great job of doing that within our drug court, about really incentivizing the behavior we want to see, and we'll be working again through the grant money that we received from SERVU to really be able to put that out through all of our probation services and not just within that one program. And I can't read the font on this side, so I apologize. I've been looking up here. We continue with our work around disproportionate minority contact with the development of a disposition matrix to ensure that all youth that are coming through our program are getting the same services and the same level of intervention. And so that has been a lot of work that we've been doing around that. The collateral consequences of system involvement, we call PAC beds, which is alternative to confinement beds, has been a huge help with that again, so that we're making sure that only those kids who need to be in a detention center are going to be there. And then also, as part of our county strategic plan, really setting up some minimized use of confinement around that to make sure that kids that we're holding in detention are really there for a community safety risk, and not as a kind of a punishment of not following their rules. So. Back over
to me. Hi. So I get the privilege of talking about the highlights of this current fiscal year's outcomes. So you can see we have people up there as well as some data for you. So obviously the culinary arts program, you can see from the slide or the picture on the top left that folks that were recognized this morning. And then Kathleen mentioned the crews that go out. You can see the pictures of some of the crews that are working on the trails. And then some of the data points that we wanted to share with you from youth services, that there are about 252 youth and parents and guardians who have attended the minor in possession class this past year, or this current fiscal year. And there's about 291 youth who will have attended the impacts of crime class, as well as the community service has increased 20%. And then behavioral health, Pauline talked a lot about the increased needs for people who have behavioral health needs. And actually, we have increased our client service needs by 28%, as well as we've increased encounters by 23%. And what that means is we are providing additional services such as case management and peer support. So with future challenges always comes opportunities. So you've heard a lot today about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that these two divisions are working on. So increasing community-based diversion opportunities for youth in the rural areas that Nathalie talked about, as well as our youth services detention pods needs a paint job. So we want to make sure that we have a safe environment for youth. We're working on that with the capital improvement plan. And then we also are looking at an opportunity to find resources for a homeless runaway youth shelter. And for behavioral health, we really want to focus on the rural areas and look for more behavioral services in those areas that are in need. And of course, you've probably heard about the mental health crisis services that we are looking to expand in this county, as well as substance abuse treatment. So Health and Human Services work is absolutely in alignment with Lane County's strategic plan. Not gonna read the whole slide to you, but I'm gonna just point out a couple of significant programs and the work that we're doing. Under Safe Healthy County, we're looking at our increase in opioid treatment and overdose prevention, as well as increasing access to primary care and behavioral health services. And with youth services under incarceration, we want to make sure that our detention services have a trauma-informed care lens, and working on that, as well as diversion and probationary services are really focused on incentivizing and our positive behavior supports. Under Vibrant Communities, I want to talk about Nathalie mentioned this, the strengthen the restorative opportunities for youth and families using evidence-based practices. And of course, all of the equity work we're doing with all of the community advisory committees. And then the robust infrastructure, I'm sure you've heard that we are expanding in some way, so the medication-assisted treatment program is looking at remodeling in order to meet the needs, as well as the forensics program has been moving out to the Heron Center out on Coburg Road. So the behavioral health has additional capacity for more client access and for staff. And then finally, our people and partnerships. We are committed in our department to implementing trauma-informed care practices and also providing professional development opportunities and trainings for staff, as well as always increasing our partnerships with public, nonprofit organizations, and of course the Mental Health Summit, which has definitely been a key partner in moving us forward. So thank you, and we'd like to know if you have any questions.
So let's start off with Ms. Sugar, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions about youth services. So, I just want to say how, having worked in that department as the deputy DA who prosecuted those cases, I really appreciate the work of the juvenile probation officers, the detention facility, everyone there, and I'm sure that it continues to be a model for our state, not just for our county. So thank you for what you do. And I wanted to ask a question to follow up. You mentioned that you have only, it sounds like maybe one pod open with 16 beds. Recognizing that there are 2 other pods in that facility that we built as members of the county. And you mentioned that OYA and the Measure 11 folks take up some of those beds. Do they take up some of those 16, or is it
Of those 16.
They do?
Yeah.
So, to follow up with that, one of my questions is that, do we have what we need? Are we using what we need? Would your probation officers and Witcher Court and everyone say, no, we need to, we really, ideally, we would open another pod? Or do you feel that with the work you're doing to establish diversion programs and other alternatives to incarceration, that we're doing okay with the 16?
We're doing fine with 16.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, generally, when we're, with detention, law enforcement can show up anytime with them, but we're generally fine on that. I mean, the last time we even got up to 16, which we wouldn't want to hover there because law enforcement can show up at any time, was probably a year ago or something. And so I wouldn't want any fewer than 16 because, as of this morning, I think we were at 12 or so. And so, and staffings are kind of in 8s. And so we wouldn't want to go lower than what we have. So I'll just make sure everybody hears that. But we definitely wouldn't need more than that.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
thank you. And
Yeah.
may I ask another?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious, we are talking here about the Behavioral Health Crisis Center for Adults. And you mentioned the need for a homeless and runaway youth facility. Do you envision that being similar in its, would it also serve some of the behavioral health crisis, or would it be simply a shelter? And what do you know, and I may not, maybe you all have talked about this, and I'm just not privy to that, so.
Do you want me to start? Yeah.
Okay. So there absolutely are needs on both the youth side and the adult side, and I think they're different needs. So the project that we're talking about on Tuesday next week is adult focused. Simultaneously, we're looking at what are the most significant needs for kids. There is a community group that has been looking at, is there a way to repurpose one of the empty pods? There's one pod that has an outside entrance, so is there a way to use that pod in service to some of our at-risk kids? Homeless shelter is one idea, that assessment center has been another idea, so community coalition's kind of working on what would be the best use of that for kids. We also, on the mental health crisis side, we partner with Trillion for youth mobile crisis, and you can ask tomorrow Lisa Roth when she's up here at the table a little bit about that too. We can do better on that system, so that's on our list for next year too, is to figure out how to improve that mobile crisis for kids. And then also watching what's happening with school funding. We're expecting some more resources to come down to schools to address behavioral health concerns, and so we've been in conversations with the hospital and then schools to how do we address the needs of kids who are landing at the emergency department without any place to go. So I think there's two different solutions, and both of them are on the list for next year.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about the types of data you keep in terms of youth services, and whether or not you have any kind of way to have any outcomes for your services. We heard earlier from the DA saying, well, we're basically reacting to what comes in the door. In her case, it's paper that comes from police departments that are making a recommendation for prosecution. I guess in your case, it's kids that show up in police cars at the detention facility, and maybe paper that comes in from other agencies. I'm just curious whether there's a way to measure what it is you're doing, and if there's any way to have those terms that we use in our strategic plan, which are goals for how we want to make the county a better place, not only for the people that work here, but the people that we serve. And I'm curious whether you have any data, whether you use it, if there's examples of outcome data that is used in the youth services component of the public safety system.
Thank you. So there's a statewide organization for juvenile departments, and so our data system is part of Oregon Youth Authority and a partnership with the Juvenile Department Association. And so we collect data on everything, and we're able to then pull those results from the statewide system on that to be able to look at, the number of youth that we have. I mean, we know with the youth that are coming to us, and this is pretty close around the state as well. Out of the kids that come to us, 70% will never come back to us again, right? That they were doing a first referral, they're not gonna come back. Of those remaining 30%, 23% will do a second crime, and about 7% of those kids will go on to do 3 or more, and it's really those kids that we're trying to hone in to figure out how can we figure out who those kids are to really be able to focus on them. And the statewide organization is doing work around, we have our disposition matrix that we use in our division, and all the counties have one, and we're actually in the process of rolling out the juvenile crime prevention assessment for all kids. Historically, we've been doing those just for the higher risk kids on probation and not for diversion kids. And so we've just trained up staff over the last month that will be able to be rolled out so that we can have better data on all the kids that are coming through our system and not just those ones that are on probation.
And I guess what I would add is we publish annually statistics and data out of youth services. We've been doing that for a number of years. So yes, we absolutely have that data, and we'd be happy to provide the last version to the board.
I'm just curious about whether there's the use of historic, i.e. earlier today and before, historic data and its use in how you program your additional services. For example, the question about, well, do you need more detention beds? Well, sort of, I got the view, no, you don't, because of your experience and knowledge, but I'm saying, I would like to know whether or not there's some data that supports that view. Well, that takes care of that 7%, those detention beds, those 16 detention beds take care of that 7%, and that 7% number is a number that we can really rely on. It's not just a one-day number, it's not a one-year number, it's maybe a 5-year number. And you have historical data to support the idea, well, we got 7% of these kids are committing 2 or more crimes, or 3 or more crimes. And I guess in economic terms, we're gonna assume that those other kids, those other 93%, will somehow not commit very many more crimes as adults, and it's good to focus on that 7%. Fair statement?
Yes, yeah, and I can certainly pull up, I mean, we absolutely, I would hand you the one I have here, but I carry it around, and so it's not in great shape, but we collect data in every way for the kids that are coming through, and then trying to work with quality and compliance to figure out how we can get that, since it's confidential juvenile information, in a way that we would be able to wrap more into the department on that way. But I'd be happy to share with you our historical stuff, and then also the stuff that comes out from the state, so you'd be able to compare it to
farthest away, and Tom Turner, as the police chief, was an eager partner with us to do that. And then, once we have it figured out in Florence, South Lane is our next place.
Excellent. So it's in the planning, decision-making stage. I think something was going on. Your mention of a mobile unit, that's a pretty intriguing concept of a mobile unit. The second was empty facilities. You know, we need that new wing for behavioral health, and we're moving, let's see, who's moving to the Huron Center?
Forensics.
Forensics is moving to the Huron Center to provide more space. We're always looking for more space, yet we do have empty spaces, and I know you're working on it. So can you touch bases just briefly on what may be happening with some of our empty spaces, two in particular. One has been called the Salmon Pod, and it's the one with the exterior access that a community group is looking at an RFP perhaps, or a recommendation as to how we may use it for youth services. The other is the Armory facility, which is a large 8,000 or so square foot facility that's been empty for a long time. Just satisfy my curiosity, are we moving forward on either of those two?
Andrew, do you want to talk about that?
Go ahead.
I will, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I know the answer.
The Salmon Pod,
Then why'd you ask the question?
talked about a little earlier. So we would expect that in the not too distant future that we'll come back to the board with a request for proposal process around serving at-risk youth in crisis through that Salmon Pod facility. And then separate, the Armory, we actually have staked out time on your agenda. I think it's June 6th. 11th. That's why you should. June 11th, we'll come back to the board with some options around the Armory. We have longer-term options. We've been working specifically with DD, and tomorrow when Carla is up here, she can talk to you about the needs at DD. But we have some options to present to the board in June on that.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to hear the description of, we do have empty space, but they are looking to fill the void, you know, to move services in there. And it's pretty exciting to know that that is in progress. And it's not just beginning the progress, you're at an advanced stages of planning it. By the way, that's 10 a.m. time certain on June 11th. So thank you very much. That's, once again, I mentioned with the sheriff, the use of available resources and the best way to use your resources. You guys are masters of that. Thank you.
Commissioner Bernie.
First off, I want to thank you. Once a long time ago, being involved in youth services, I don't think I've ever met a more dedicated or competent or capable group of people. In fact, for all the budget committee members that are asking about data, here's all the data I care about. There's not one county dollar going into your program. And is that correct?
Well, youth services gets county general fund dollars.
Those are all our dollars.
Which is the program that doesn't receive?
The community health centers don't get any county general fund dollars. I can go around the room, let's see. Our clinical financial services, our developmental disabilities, quality and compliance, Trillium behavioral health, all do not receive any.
I think it's phenomenal. I'd like to reactivate my offer as it relates to Charlie Royer, ex-mayor of Seattle, ex-KVAL news anchor in the 70s here, who works with the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation. I really think you could attract some of that money. Mike, I guess my question is just this, or it's just a statement. There was once a professor at the U of O, a guy named Art Pearl, who passed away, that wrote a book called Mental Health for the Poor. And in that book, he argued that feelings of usefulness and belongingness and meaning and purpose, etc., were vital in the various arenas of life that young people work, operate, and live in. And so I'm not putting you on the spot at all, but I am asking you, I'm hoping that to the very ground level of the programs you operate and the services that you provide, that you do integrate in meaningful ways young people. And because when you do that, you're also doing something that many teachers I know in schools feel bad about, and that's that they don't feel they're giving our young people the kind of civic education that really engages them in ways that decrease socially destructive or personally destructive behavior and increase positive stuff and what have you. And to the degree that that I could help you, I would love to, because I think that's really, really a big deal. It's not quantifiable. It won't show up oftentimes initially in a lot of data, but it makes all the difference in the world. And you could speak to the degree you do it, although I would love it if you could dig deeper and permeate more as much and with every opportunity that you have.
Do you want to address that at all, Kathleen?
I mean, just
Yes, we
listening.
do. I mean, in terms of the resilience work, I think
Absolutely.
that is core to the work that we do with kids. And in watching the approach Kathleen has had in her 2 years, 3 years, no, 3 years, time flies. Her 3 years at Youth Services of really looking at how do we make sure that we are addressing those resilience needs for kids? How do we make sure we are not locking up kids, not isolating kids who don't absolutely need that? So I would say that body of work is central to our work at Youth
Are you
Services.
conducting any longitudinal studies as it relates to that body of work?
We have not had any longitudinal
Yeah.
studies that I know of. The one thing I will share is that our all-staff meeting for the department recently, we had speakers come out that come from Kids of Hope. And one of the things I so appreciated that they talked about is because we will often talk about what are the risk scores, and their whole message is about, and what are the hope scores that we have for this kid, right? Because we know that if there is a person who really invests in a kid and really shows these kids that there's another way and another path, that kids will hook on to that, right? I mean, we absolutely believe kids are doing the best they can with the skills that they have developed at that point, right? And that it's our job to give them some other skills and to put some other stuff in that box to be able to help them be able to have things to draw on. And it was a remarkable opportunity at our all-staff to be able to hear from somebody, one of the main speakers, Antoine Fisher, really speak to what that meant to him to have somebody to have hope in that way. Yeah,
That's really cool.
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Mr. O.
Just a couple of quick ones. You mentioned a grant award that you were expecting in the spring from Serbu.
It's Serbu, yeah, so from the Oregon Community Foundation.
You haven't found out yet?
Yeah, we actually just found out last week, and so we do have that, and that is reflected in the proposed budget as well, yeah.
And then the other one was the Phoenix study. Has that been completed?
That is just about there, and we're going to be having that in June is when that's going to be ready to share the information from that. And it's been great. As Commissioner Farr knows, I teach about a maximum security prison, and Dr. Altucker has started teaching in that same program as well. And so I cornered him out of prison once saying, could you come please do this for us? And so he does program evaluations. He's done for the city of Eugene for their teen court that they've had in place for years. And so we're really fortunate to be able to have somebody looking into this that knows a lot about juvenile justice and criminal justice, and as a researcher at the university, be able to put this together for us. So I look forward to being able to share those results.
Thank you.
Very good.
I have one last quick question, if I may.
Commissioner Farr.
Did you say crisis center?
I did.
Okay, that's what I thought.
You're so subtle.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Do you know if there's any way to improve what you're doing in your work? Is there any, like you said, if we said, yeah, this is great, this is fantastic, could you do it better?
Absolutely. I mean, I would love to share with
how,
you.
like on our end, usually what we want to do is if we feel like someone's doing a good job, we want to make sure that they have the adequate resources to keep doing what they're doing. And yet we also live in a balanced budget environment where we don't have enough money to give all the programs. I'm just curious if you had a wish list of things that you could use that you're currently not getting and not likely to get, but at least future budget committees would have that wish list.
I mean, I will say I feel very fortunate that I feel like we have what we need within our division to do really great work, and we are always looking for how we can do that better in service to the youth and the community. I think for the kids that are coming through our program, certainly what they could use more as far as in the larger community sense would be crisis respite places to be able to stay at. For some of the kids and families, when there's really challenging behaviors, things end up going sideways pretty quickly, which if there was a and a more crisis place for youth to be able to go to, with services that would be brought in for that youth. I think that would be huge. The assessment center, which there's community conversation with right now, and they have that type of assessment center up in Multnomah County to really be able to assist youth and law enforcement when they're picking up kids, instead of being able to bring them further into the system, to be able to take them to an assessment center where those kids are going to be able to access mental health treatment, if DHS, if nonprofits, mental health providers are able to be part of that conversation as well, to really be able to help. Because for a lot of these kids, it's larger than just their behavior. It's kind of the system in which they're living in, and to really be able to provide resources to the family in that way.
Pauline, you have a wish list?
I do. Yeah, we can always do better, and I think as far as behavioral health goes, we've been talking about the crisis respite, place where people who have low-level misdemeanors can go first before they shipped to jail or other facilities. The other thing I think we could do better in the community is more preventative services, thinking more in terms of better outreach. I think a lot of what we focus our attention on is managing the crisis, and I think we could do better on the other end of identifying ways to prevent that. So there is some outreach happening, but I think we could do more.
I hear more punk rock too.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll do a quick change out to parole and probation.
Christine? Christine? Yes. Here's another. Sorry. Push my computer back.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
That's a really good point about
I've seen it turn around. I've never worked the program, but still. There's a matrix I'm not familiar with, but that's something to gratification, just a feeling that she's usefulness, all these things that help out.
Oh, and she, my
Well, we're getting the full metal jacket here today.
Yes.
Yes.
Who's got, you say you're loaded for bear.
Okay, welcome.
That's probably worse than.
Thank you. Thank you. I will start us off. I'm Greg Rickoff. I'm the Director of Operations, Chief Operating Officer, and it is my honor to have a chance to work with and support parole and probation. With me is Donovan Dumar, the remarkable manager. I will let him explain his outfit today because he is fresh from training.
Yes. Good afternoon. I apologize for my dress. We've been in training, well, today was the first day and we picked the right week to do it. It's only supposed to be in the 80s, so. So what we're actually doing is we've got several new firearms instructors that we're bringing up to speed. The idea is to develop some succession planning to remove some of our supervisors from those roles and allow our firearms instructors to take more of a point in providing some of that training for the team. So I've been helping out with that for the last, for today and tomorrow as well. So I apologize in advance.
A full workday in addition to this presentation. And then Len Smith, our accounting analyst, is here to help us with the numbers and correct our misstatements as we work our through the presentation. You want to go ahead and click through to the next slide, and I think it's your slide.
So I just hit this button? All right. Well, thank you. And first thing I'd like to do is just talk about the mission. To improve the quality of life in Lane County by effectively responding to risk, need, and promoting positive change. I think the most important thing about our mission is it wasn't just a leadership team coming together to say, hey, this is what we should do. In fact, our mission, our vision, our values, our expectations were all developed by our team. So this was a team effort, and that was done about 5 years ago. And today, everything that we do revolves around our brand. Currently, we have 2,930 people on supervision. That number shifts weekly, but it's right around 3,000. The important part about that number, when you look at the 1,494 high-risk individuals, when you look at our comparators, especially Marion County, you're gonna notice that the data is reversed. And so in Marion County, for example, we have 1,494 high risk. Marion County's got right around 1,300 low risk. And so what we have here is we really have a flip in a high risk population here in Lane County. And the belief is around just the lack of prosecution over the years and just with the budget and the amount of no files that we've had historically, we've seen that number grow. People have been allowed to grow in their criminal maturity, and as a result, when they're prosecuted and they're brought to us for supervision, they're coming in at a much, much higher rate than if you had some earlier prosecution that was to bring those folks in earlier. And what we have seen, though, is the great prosecution efforts by our DA, is we've actually seen these numbers start to kind of reverse. So those 548 cases has actually risen to the low risk, so we're seeing a lot more, or some better preactive efforts. And we're also seeing those medium risk numbers to kind of plateau and level as well with the rest of the state. So those are great trends that are occurring. As far as specialized supervision, we really make an effort to align with research, best practices, and we've developed expertise within the different supervision, and so we're meeting folks with the needs that they have. So sex offender, domestic violence, treatment court, mental health, justice-involved women has been an initiative that has really grown in research over the last couple of years, and we've been really doing a good job in being at the forefront of that. The 416 program, again, those diversions, moving people from prison to the community, and it's been a great collaboration with our DA's office. And then AIP, the Alternative Incarceration Program, we know that folks stumble out of the blocks within the first 90 days, and so providing those intensive services at time of release from prison is important. So we've really identified the needs and provided those services.
Let's keep moving on. We'll try to get you caught up a little bit.
Yes, okay.
Do that quickly.
Oh, do I go to next?
Can you just do the arrow there, Donovan?
This one?
No, we're on the.
Yeah, up to you. That's it. Our one-legged stool, all special revenue funds coming in from state dollars. This is the Community Corrections Act dollars and Justice Reinvestment Grant. So it's grant in aid dollars. Let's move to the next slide.
No general fund.
No general fund. There's one parole officer that works within the sheriff's office, specifically with the jail, the Sherman Center program, that they've chosen to use some of their general fund dollars to support that one position, but that would be it. No general fund, here we are. What's important to note at this point is we don't know what our budget's going to do. These are state pass-through dollars, and one of the last things they will do before sine die is determine what the grant and aid dollars are going to look like, what the Community Corrections Act and the Justice Reinvestment Grant dollars are going to look like. What we do know is we are getting a larger slice of the pie. Because of our numbers, the formula works, we're moving from about 9.29% of the state funding to 9.5%, or 9.57% of the state funding will be coming to Lane County. Now, it'll be the PSCC, they'll be making the initial determination that will be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their final determination, but we're unlikely to know that before summertime. So our numbers are flat. So the budget, we build our budget based on the numbers that we got in the last biennium.
Okay. This slide, essentially what we're looking at here is one of the things that parole and probation really does. We have about $3.4 million in which we're really pass-through dollars. So parole and probation develops contracts for services, providers for our client population and for system needs, county needs. One of the significant increases this year, $364,135 has been under personnel services. And that is really the settling of the FAPO contract most recently. Partnerships, this is a slide that I'm really proud of. We are incredibly blessed in Lane County to have incredible collaboration among partners. I am really impressed with the partnership. You don't get that in every county, and we here in Lane County work very well together. We utilize each other's resources, and we really partner very well. Lane County Sheriff's Office has been an incredible partner, especially around alternative programs and being able to assist us in not only holding folks accountable, but doing it in a way that really supports our case management and improving their life and providing them with programming needs. The District Attorney's Office, and I would add the courts in there as well, have been amazing partners. The collaboration that we've had with them has just been a great partnership. And this is not an inclusive list. We have several partners, but these are some incredible partnerships that we've developed through the last 5 years since I've been here. And we've had partnerships running for over 20 plus years. So.
Yeah, I think it's true. It shouldn't go without saying, anybody that works in law enforcement, in community corrections, that have worked in any other part of the state or the region, when they come to Lane County and they get a chance to see what Sponsors does, it is truly off the charts in terms of how it provides that needed initial bridge. And the collaboration that's going on right now between Homes for Good, Sponsors, and Parole and Probation has really built some innovative collaborative systems where we have parole officers on site.
Yeah.
I think we'll talk a little bit more of that as we talk about some of the highlights.
Okay. Some of the highlights from this last year, as I mentioned, the Justice Involved Women's Initiative, we've really done a tremendous job. We've identified 3 officers that are just incredible. They're passionate, they're trained, and they are specialized in that they use assessments that are specific to our Justice Involved Women. They use tools. We've also have a victim advocate that's assigned to that team as well. And we've developed programming that's specific to women on supervision. Part of that initiative allowed us to develop a house or an office that was specific for women and reporting to that location, and so separating them from our male population has been very, very productive. We, this last year, launched The Way Home. This is the Pay for Success, the outcome-driven success payments that we have with Homes for Good and Sponsors. That's up and running. One of our officers has been trained and is working with sponsors within that office at the Oaks to facilitate and really build that program. Over this last year, we have completed our policies, so the area of policy development. So we have officially transitioned from the general orders with the Sheriff's Office. So we have our own policies now, so that's a gold star.
One of the histories, and for those of you that have been here for a while will know that Parole and Probation has had a nomadic history and has gone from department to department, and consequently has there's been a lag time in getting its own standalone policies and procedures. And so we've been able to complete that and feel very good about that collaborative effort. It was certainly led by management, but had a lot of buy-in by the entire division working hard on those elements. And it feels like that helps us now be home.
And a lot of those policies actually have evidence-based practices built into them and research that really supports the efforts too. Which has been
a lot of folks don't get excited about policy development. We do.
The other thing on this, I think...
Is that what excited looks like, Ray?
That's it.
Those policy-making excitement.
The Crisis Intervention Response Team, this has been just an incredible benchmark in developing. You see 6 people that have been trained as Crisis Intervention Team response members. There's actually 7. And with the work that we do, the stress, this has been an incredible opportunity really to ensure the wellness of our officers and to provide some resources for them in conducting their jobs. So it's been a very satisfying and rewarding team to develop. Fun.
All right. Future challenges and opportunities. You'll note that we have budgeted an 8% vacancy variance. Finding officers, training up officers is a specific challenge. You've spent this afternoon hearing from the Sheriff's Office, hearing from Health and Human Services. Our officers are sworn officers with all of the authority, duties, and responsibilities of law enforcement officers here in the state of Oregon, and yet they are completely embedded in a social service, human service framework. It really is a specialized set of skills that we're looking for. It's all of that officer safety requirement and the ability to set very clear boundaries and truly the commitment to change people's lives. So we tend to go through a lot of officers. We tend to go through a lot of applications, a lot of selection, a lot of screening with both the background check and the psych eval, and then intensive training that does include DPSST, as well as field service training. The rate of getting folks through is probably close to 50%. So it's a heavy lift, and we think these numbers, we'd love to see this come down. If we're sitting here in front of you in the future with an 8% variance, vacancy variance, I would feel like we are letting our parole officers down. We want that to come down, but this is our reality. Ongoing heavy workloads. We really are an outlier in the state of Oregon in terms of those high risk, those clients that are at high risk of reoffending. That means those require lots of touch points, lots of engagement, and that's a pretty heavy burden on our officers. We're really working hard to get that reduced. Thank you, Budget Committee, for those of you here last year when you toured parole and probation. You saw for yourselves how tightly compact we are and how we're not optimally designed. So one of the decisions this past year was to find us a new home. I'm happy to say that we're down to 2 sites. We've taken 2 sites. We're actively pursuing the costing for those sites. One would be a lease to purchase, the other would be a leased site. They're suitable, and we expect the costing information to be coming back to us momentarily, and this is going to be the year that we move into a new home. We're very excited for that.
Okay. As far as the Lane County strategic plan, parole and probation really does hit on all those facets. I talked a little bit already about our people and partnerships, the Sherman Center with the Sheriff's Office, Pay for Success, sponsors, Homes for Good, prison diversion program. I didn't really talk too much about that, but it's a partnership with the District Attorney's Office, Lane County Sheriff's Office, and sponsors. And really it's our 416. We're diverting those prison-bound individuals and keeping them really at the local level with intensive supervision and programming. And then the RLAN, didn't really talk too much about that, but it's the Release Lane County program in which we're reducing prison population by bringing individuals out to the community from prison 60 days prior to their short-term transition leave, getting them an early start. They stay at the Community Corrections Center and then slowly transition into the community through sponsors and then to permanent housing. Robust infrastructure. Greg's already talked a little bit about our new location. The space that we're currently in at the CCC upstairs, the idea certainly is that would be an incredible resource to expand the CCC and really have the opportunity to have more transition from jail to the community with that structure. And so we're looking forward to that, but there's certainly some costs involved in converting that back to the CCC.
Yeah, the Sheriff's Office Community Corrections Center. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And then with the Vibrant Communities, we are passionate about risk need, reducing risk, and really seeing people for the long-term reductions in recidivism. And how we do that is we provide treatment, we provide services, in addition to that accountability, and we kind of marry those two things, working in collaboration with our partners. Assisting in developing healthy families and community members. Boy, if we do this right, we can impact generations. And it really is a humble calling in this profession. Safe Health County, again, we talked a little bit about the Justice Involved Women's Initiative. Florence jail beds, essentially our partnership and working with the city of Florence has allowed us 2 jail beds at relatively low cost. I think we covered the cost of food, but it really allows for swift, certain sanctioning within the city of Florence, and they have been just an incredible partner. Lane County Sheriff's Office, Parole and Probation, looking at the alternative programs, we talked about that. Sheriff's Office does as an incredible service. And then the Pay for Success Housing Initiative, I talked a little bit about that, and that's the outcomes-driven funding program that we have in the county. But, yes.
One of the nice things, and maybe we could share this with the Budget Committee, the Evaluating Oregon's Community Corrections Act. This is the state brag book about community corrections. You might as well call it the Lane County brag book, because there's 3 separate programs that they've called out in recognition that it is innovative, best practice, and leading the way. And sometimes we fail to kind of call attention to the fact that we're actually modeling programs that the rest of the state is trying to replicate. They started here, a lot thanks to the leadership of Donovan and his team, to the officers that serve. I think that's it.
That's it.
Questions? Mr. Stormberg.
Mr. Rickoff, I have a clarification on that question. You mentioned that we're getting a larger piece of the pie.
Yes.
In terms of state money, and that's due to the amount of people we have under supervision compared to the other counties, right?
Correct.
And then, so that's driven by prosecution, right?
Correct.
And then, so I guess my question for Mr. Delmeyer is if, and obviously it's not for certain, but if that district attorney's office suffers the 3.5 FTE or whatever it is, what impact will that have on your office and specifically what you are trying to accomplish?
Yeah,
and
certainly.
future funding possibly.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if a reduction of prosecution, that would mean a reduced population of our probation population, which would ultimately increase our numbers on supervision, which would ultimately reflect our funding.
It's an interwoven system. I don't know if you've brought the system graph from past years.
We showed it on Thursday.
Excellent.
Our system really is interdependent on each other, right from law enforcement to the amount of arrests they make to prosecution to be able to keep up on that. And it really is a domino.
It would do us harm, our piece of our way of supply tree.
Fantastic, thank you.
Ms. Sugar.
Thank you for what you do. I haven't worked with either of you, but I used to work very closely with Parole and Probation when I was the deputy DA. So, I have a couple of questions. The first, I noticed that you have resumed supervision of some domestic violence misdemeanors. But it looks to me like there's a cap on that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're meeting the needs of the community adequately, or do you feel like you have to say no to some domestic violence misdemeanors on probation who you think need supervision?
Yeah, so it's absolutely a disservice. The only reason we're able to supervise the 60, and I know we've really stretched that to 70.
Okay.
Because we are so passionate about taking on the highest risk folks, but we actually are able to supervise those folks through an arrest grant that we receive each year and renew. So there is no funding for misdemeanors within our budget. And so the arrest grant actually allows us to fund a caseload specifically to working with our high-risk domestic violence misdemeanor folks. And they are incredibly high risk, and that's not to say that there's not a whole host of other high-risk individuals that are not receiving supervision as a result.
Would you agree, though, that supervising even misdemeanants who are in this particular crime category of domestic violence offenders is really part of crime prevention?
Yeah, and misdemeanor has no bearing on risk.
Right.
That's the risk factors are still there, and if people are rising to the point where they're committing crimes and violence against others, my guess is that there's a history there that would support that behavior. So it's probably not the first time that somebody has acted out. So.
All right, thank you. And then the other question that I have is sort of a more broad question. We've been hearing a lot in the last week about the Behavioral Health Crisis Center and I'm curious, because I just don't know, will parole and probation be able to access that for sanctions or for other situations in lieu of incarceration? And two, how much of your population that you supervise is struggling with being unhoused, and how is that impacting your ability to supervise?
Yeah, certainly.
Great questions.
Yeah, and the housing is still, I mean, we have, I think, some of the best housing in the state, I would argue the country, as far as how we can meet needs effectively. And we have data that shows true reductions in the work that we're doing with our transition housing. And so even with some of the best housing, we still have caps. I mean, we're putting the highest of the high risk, but that's not to say that there's not high-risk people in need of housing. So just because we have resources doesn't mean that it's adequate. There certainly is a need for additional housing. We've seen the impact that it can have in reducing recidivism if we can tie that to programming. And so that's an area that we can always use additional services in. The other piece of that I would add is the long-term sustainable housing. So after we have provided that intensive 90-day programming where we're really providing those services, that bridge housing that is also able to see people move on to the next phase and actually stay out of the system. So it's not that temporary bandage.
Can you speak to the cooperation in behavioral health?
Yeah, and so we actually have assigned, 4.5 years ago, we identified a need here in Lane County with a specialized officer. Historically, we've had 35, 40 officers handling behavioral health. And so what we determined is having a single point of contact was really ideal and most efficient in working with that population. Also identifying that that individual has specialized training to be able to work with behavioral health. And so most recently we've actually assigned, I think it's been about 2 years now, we have an officer that's assigned to Lane County Behavioral Health for up until very recently with their office crunch. We have had co-housing, so we've had an officer that shared a space with Lane County Behavioral Health and working those case plans together and providing those services. So we have been working closely with Lane County Behavioral Health. It sounds like they're looking at some additional space for their forensic program, and the plan is to, once that space is developed, is to, again, provide an officer there to continue to bridge in case planning and meeting the needs there.
Thank you.
Mr. Abel?
Greg, you mentioned the new facility, and I was one of the people that took that tour, so I definitely know you need it. But it says here you set aside $1.6 million in one-time savings. What was that?
Yes. Where did it come from, or what is it for?
Where's it come from? I know what it's for.
It's been cobbled together. A chunk of it has come from the Public Safety Coordinating Council and their determination that it will help the larger system. That was about $500,000. And then the rest of it has been in salary.
Personnel savings.
And just cobbled together over time.
Supervision fees has also been another big area.
Fees, yeah.
Our officers have really embraced a new home. And so we have seen a strong effort from our officers in collecting fees. And so anything above $33,333.33. In fact, in supervision fee collections,
yes,
goes to relocation. And so our officers are very familiar with that number and how much of that will go on to relocation.
Anything beyond the annual budgeted amount, yes.
Yes.
Does the reserve show up in your budget anywhere?
Reserves are going to be in the fund, remember, so you'll find that in the non-departmental section. So reserves are not by department.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Commissioner Burney?
given all my years of never having served as deputy DA, I'm just kidding. I'm just being silly. Could was it called Pay for Success? Could you? I'm not familiar with it, and I apologize.
No,
Can
it's
you
great.
walk me through how that works and what kind of dollars are involved? And especially if I'm on probation, I assume I get some money when I come out of probation. Is that correct? How does that work?
So you actually would receive services. So the way that would work is we would identify outcomes, and so we would have X amount of clients. Let's use housing. So we've been able to sustain housing, and if we were to achieve those benchmarks, there's an end payer that would then provide those funds to be able to continue the program as kind of an incentive to keeping the program going. So it really is kind of an outcome-driven program where if you reach kind of milestones, there's funding that is kind of provided as kind of an incentive to continue that program.
Would I find that funding in the budget?
I don't think you would. So this is a national initiative right now, and we've got a pilot project going. I think we're the smallest community across the country that's been selected to be part of this initiative. And what we've received has been a launch strategy and an investment in skill building with parole and probation, Homes for Good, sponsors and Homes for Good. So it's those three partners. So the money is mixed, and the idea is to put together a strategy that proves results, and then you really find either public or private dollars that are willing to invest in the success of the program. Folks that are committed to make sure that what they're paying for actually works, that is a strategic success. So. It's an innovative program. We're a year in. Or 2 years?
I think we launched last September. So and it really is an amazing opportunity for us to be able to pilot kind of new and innovative supervision tactics, and right down to caseload sizes and I won't get into dosage, duration, and intensity, but right into
That's a good thing.
Yeah, right into meeting people where they're at. And working with them to effectively reduce their risk.
Thank you. Thanks.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Well, first of all, I always enjoy, the combination of the sworn police officer and the counselor role, like in one person. And I mean, it's a great profession for people that are out there thinking about what they'd like to do when they grow up. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, and the officers are all really great people. I'm interested in your risk assessment and the tool that's used. Is that tool used throughout the correction system of the state, the county? Is it used by police officers, Eugene police officers? Is that tool used by all these folks, or is it just used once they go into your branch of this whole criminal justice tree?
Yeah, great question. So we actually have two assessments. We have several specialized assessments, but the first assessment that we utilize is the public safety checklist. And that assessment is really kind of a static, meaning it looks at historical factors that don't change. And
Is that a national risk assessment or a state?
That's a state that's a state assessment, and really what that's used for right now is developing funding. The assessment that we use for supervision purposes is the LSCMI, the Level of Services Case Management Inventory, and that is a statewide assessment that we use. So when people are released, in fact, when they're in prison, they actually will receive that assessment while they're in custody. And really what that does is it really puts a full picture as far as treatment and case planning, as far as what the needs are and the risk and the prioritization of those needs. So
Let me ask you at a practical level. When I drive home this evening, there's a high likelihood I will drive slower than most people. And sometimes Eugene police officers pull me over to warn me. Sometimes they even ticket me for driving too slowly. I know that's a rare crime or offense. But when the officer pulls me over to admonish me for not driving faster, Does the officer know what my risk level is, in other words, is that information that's known by Oregon police officers and by prosecutors and by sheriffs who detain people in corrections facilities, by juvenile officials, or is that something that's only used in your area where you're trying to make sure you know what the risk is of any given person?
So the LSCMI is primarily used for our assessments and case planning. The risk level, certainly we have designators through LEDs, so they will know who, that they're on supervision.
They'll only know through LEDs they're on supervision, right?
Right. So there are designators that are there, so if somebody has been deemed a violent, dangerous offender, they would have that designation within their LEDs profile.
Is it used in corrections?
The LSCMI?
Yeah.
So we utilize the assessment. I know Department of Corrections is using that.
Lane County.
And so Lane
Sheriff's
County,
Office.
they actually utilize they have an assessment that really matches up. And so they have, it used to be it's the Lane County Risk Assessment, we'll call it that.
They don't use the other one.
They don't use the LSCMI, but what I have had the opportunity to do, Dan Buchwald and I several years ago actually went through the Lane County Sheriff's Office assessment and used the LSCMI and kind of looked at that and made the determination that most of the things that are within the Sheriff's Office assessment are actually also taken from our risk needs assessment as well.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you bet.
Mr. Morris.
I'll be very quick. So first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation and your forthright with all the information. The high risk versus low risk for the officers, what is the time commitment for high risk versus the low risk?
Yeah, so low risk, and when we look at low risk, we're looking at, and I think Nathleen talked about it earlier, it's their percentage of recidivism. And so we always prioritize our resources to the highest risk. And so when we're looking at case management, low risk would receive little to no supervision, and we would be focusing, and especially in Lane County when we have 930 high-risk individuals, the bulk of our focus and attention really is to that high-risk population. And so it is intensive supervision, so at a minimal, we're looking at one office visit a month. We're looking at home visits every other month. And certainly, if at any point there's priorities or community safety issues, those things get prioritized and we will focus our attention to those that really do have the need. So we're focusing our efforts and our resources. Our caseloads right now only have high-risk caseloads, so we have kind of a multifaceted approach. We have a medium-risk caseload, and we have high-risk caseloads in which we're working to address those risk needs daily.
Okay.
So.
And then just a second question, and it's the question of the day. We have been talking about the data of individuals that are coming through your program. So do you collect data of people's, the racial data, gender data, socioeconomic,
We do. Yeah, so like juvenile, we actually have a database that collects that information as well. And we use, we have, in addition to recidivism data, 12, 24, 36 month data, we also keep, racial, gender, all the other type of data that we would need. We also have assessment data that we actually capture as well within our system, so we can actually gauge risk and reductions in risk. And so one of the other pieces I think that Lane County has collaboratively done is our randomized control trials. Over the last several years, we have been, as far as program evaluation and assessment, we've certainly had our...
Yeah, and I'd say the Justice Involved Women's Initiative is a direct relationship to watching the numbers change in terms of the number of women clients that we were seeing, and that we needed to have a more specific focus. So we do use the demographic information to have a better understanding of, what needs are out there and what needs have to be met. So, yeah, but that's available.
Commissioner Buck.
I wanted to go back to the space issue that you're having. And you mentioned that when you move, you'd like to use that as a community correctional
facility or center. Where do you house that now, and how do you envision it being different within the space that you're currently in?
So the Community Corrections Center, it's actually on the bottom floor of the building. So we have the second floor of the Community Corrections Center, and they believe overnight, and what it is work release during the day, education or work release during the day, and come back and sleep at night there at the Community Corrections Center. They believe they could use that space immediately, that their need is such that they would have folks qualifying for that specific work release program.
And in fact, the upstairs was a community correction center before we moved in. So funding was at a point where
Budget cuts, yeah.
they weren't able to fill positions to maintain that, and so it was kind of a vacant space that home probation filled.
So we see moving out as a win-win, that it would have a chance to enhance a really valuable program to the sheriff's office and give us the safety and access that we need. If you've seen the stairs over there, you know, when you're transporting somebody back to jail and needing to bring them down those stairs, it's a risky proposition.
Very good. I think that's it. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. We're going to move on to the last section of committee business. Commissioner Sorensen,
I
comment.
just wanted to mention that I have to do a minor test of some sort on Thursday, so I'll be a little late to the Thursday meeting. I'll be here about 2 o'clock instead of 1:30.
Good noted, but I believe the meeting starts at 2:30.
That's tomorrow.
No, that's tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. You're on
Yeah,
Thursday.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. That's
Drive-
exactly the mistake I made when I scheduled it.
Pete, drive fast.
Drive fast.
Okay.
Really? I
Duly
disclosed
noted,
my
Commissioner
code
Sorensen.
violation rule.
Late on Thursday. Tomorrow's
My wife
meeting.
says that too.
Tomorrow's meeting's in this room at 2:30. Ms. Moody, anything else from the
Yes, a few
sports staff?
things. So we do have some handouts for you. There are some answers to questions. Not every question that's been posed has been answered yet, but the other ones are in progress. So we'll continue to get those back to you as they're answered. PowerPoints will be online tomorrow. So those of you looking for what you saw today, where you can read all the details that they passed over. One of the handouts is also some additional information on ONC Association. We will have one more handout coming on that association, and I am still waiting for some information from OCOG. So we will still have a few things for that county dues tab, but continuing to give you that as we receive it. I did send out an email to the citizen members about a courthouse tour. I believe all the commissioners have already had a chance to do that, but we wanted to extend that to you. So if you have a chance to look at that, we do have some already publicly scheduled tours. So if those times work, those are easy. But we can also come up with a date and time if there's a couple of you that want to do that. And then I just thought I would highlight 3 items that I wrote down today that potentially the committee wants. And if you think of something else, they were the report that Greg just showed about the community corrections report, evaluating that. We can send you the PDFs of these so you have them. Youth Services indicated that they annually report on some data and have some historical data. Sounded like you were interested in that. And then also, the sheriff mentioned the public safety repair plan that was presented to the board. So if you think of anything else that you heard today, but we're happy to send those links out to you or PDFs for you to read as you would like. So I think that's all I had.
Okay. Anything else from the committee? Duly noted, adjourned.